This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. There's quite a lot going on in the world. We read that the ceasefire deal in Gaza is being finalised, so rest assured we will be keeping a very close eye on that in the course of the programme and indeed the rest of the day on LBC. A sense that the tectonic plates are shifting, but what will be left when they do, both, of course, literally in the context of the catastrophic carnage, and metaphorically in the context of the tectonic plates of politics, international relations, reputation. We will find out. 4 minutes in the years to come, not in the hours to come. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. And of course, the news coming out of America is extraordinary as well. I would suggest to you as well that the likelihood of a ministerial resignation in this country is increasing with every passing day, if not hour. Some of the details surrounding Tulip Sadiq's current position is arresting, to say the least. My instincts are that Starmer will go for process as opposed to politicking. And process involves letting the independent advisor on ethics investigate, letting him do a investigation into what she stands accused of. But I don't know. That's my instincts. That's my analysis, if you want to use a fancy word. But we shall see. So be aware of that in the course of today as well. And then there's two stories that I think are about the same thing. One is based in this country, and one is very much American. But I think, and my job is to keep them separate, because I wouldn't mind doing an hour on each, actually. But of course, if I fail to keep them separate and they merge into one, then we might struggle to do 2 hours on this. But there's a story in the UK that shows us 1 in 5 adults aged between 18 to 45 would prefer a despot to a democracy. The answer to the question, the best system for running a country effectively is a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. And the age breakdown is what fascinates me most, because it is the so-called Generation Z, born in 1997, and millennials born in 1981, who are most seduced by the idea that the best system for running a country effectively is a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. Which takes us, I think, inevitably to matters American, where the special counsel investigating Donald Trump's conduct in the context of the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election has published some of his findings. The overarching one being that he believes, Jack Smith, the special counsel, believes that Trump would have been convicted of illegally trying to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election, which he lost, if he had not successfully been re-elected in 2024. Now, you'll be aware of a lot of the evidence, and it is, of course, evidence with which we should be concerning ourselves, unfashionable though that may be. Some of the language he used when the mob was gathering, telling them to fight and that they would lose their country if they didn't fight. The knowingly false claims of election fraud. It would be, in the context of sanity, it would be impossible for Donald Trump to have believed an awful lot of things that he was claiming. He stands accused of unprecedented efforts to unlawfully retain power through a variety of methods, including threats and encouragement of violence against his perceived opponents. And that's where things get Orwellian. That's where things get, I don't even know what the word is anymore. Orwellian seems a little bit lazy, seems a little bit pat, doesn't it? Where people are denying the evidence of their own eyes and ears. You heard what he said to the mob. You saw what the mob did. You saw where they went. You saw what unfolded next. And yet some people, encouraged by Donald Trump, do not believe what they saw. Do you remember in the really early days, people were claiming that the mob had been infiltrated by anti-Trump operatives, anti-Trump activists, anti-fascist protesters, and that they were sort of attacking police officers and trying to break into the Capitol in order to make Trump look bad, as opposed to listening to the content of the speeches that he was giving at that time and just seeing night follow day, inevitably. The report also details significant challenges faced by investigators, including, and this is very much the language of despotism, his ability and willingness to use his influence and following on social media to target witnesses, courts and Department of Justice employees. They also explained that there's no point carrying on with the prosecution because the US Constitution explicitly forbids the prosecution of a sitting president, concluding, but for Mr. Trump's election in 2024 and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. Donald Trump, I haven't checked, will be calling it fake news and claiming that Jack Smith is, I don't know, in the pocket of Big Pharma. I don't know. Who's he blaming it on today? Or Joe Biden's secret love child? Or possibly, I don't know, Hillary Clinton's long-lost cousin? I don't, he'll just be telling you to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. Letter that Smith has written to accompany the case states, the claim from Mr. Trump that my decisions as a prosecutor were influenced or directed by the Biden administration or other political actors is, in a word, laughable. While we were not able to bring the cases we charged to trial, I believe the fact that our team stood up for the rule of law matters. 137 pages sent to Congress after midnight on Tuesday, American time, and it was there were desperate attempts to keep it secret, to keep it locked away, but a judge cleared the way for the first part of the report to be released. And I need you sometimes just to kind of listen, or not listen's not quite the right word. I need, what they say, a problem shared is a problem halved, because I don't know what we do really. I have a sense that when you stop pointing out that people are ignoring the evidence of their own eyes and ears, when you stop doing it, then things can only get worse, can't they? You sort of think, I can't be bothered anymore. Maybe I don't know, go back to being a video games journalist. I'm joking, but I just feel that we're coming to the same stories in some ways, from slightly different angles almost all the time. Not so much domestically yet, but we seem to be heading in that direction. Latest poll has Farage's outfit beating the Conservatives and snapping at the Labour Party's heels, despite them standing for nothing really, except being a little bit more unpleasant about immigration than we are already. That's put the Tories in an impossible hole. Looking at the state of the British media, it's an absolute miracle that the Labour Party is still top in the polls, but don't expect that to be pointed out anywhere where you were encouraged to vote for austerity, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Brexit, all the other catastrophic episodes that have brought this country to the mess that it's in today, that all of the people responsible, of course, are desperately trying to blame on the Labour government. But that's by the by. That's populism 101. This is populism 2.0. Because what we do, and I use the word we advisedly, let me just check to demonstrate that not everybody listening will be of the view that democracy is important. Here you go, Peter's here. So, as usual, Mr. O'Brien, you're taking what Mr. Smith from the Justice Department has said about Trump without any due diligence or basic journalism. I've seen so much contrary evidence allegedly showing that it was an actual government conspiracy to demonize Trump, but such is your disdain for Trump, you and your station push out any negative information. So Peter's done his research. He's found evidence on the internet that shows that when Donald Trump made a speech encouraging people to attack the Capitol, he was actually secretly working for Joe Biden's campaign team and encouraging people to attack his own vice president because that would actually help his... But I don't know. But Peter's real and he's allowed to use scissors. So these people exist. There's what, three categories, I suppose. There are people who believe the alternative facts. People who watched Kellyanne Conway a few years ago now explain that these weren't lies. These weren't lies. They might involve ignoring the evidence of your own eyes and ears, but these are alternative facts. There are facts and there are alternative facts. And people choose to believe the alternative facts. People like Peter. So, here is a bloody great elephant standing right in front of you, but Peter sees a chicken. And he is adamant that it's a chicken, and it's proof that we're all corrupt and we're all embarked upon some terrible attempt to replace white people or bring about woke universities or change everybody's milk into, I don't know. But anyway, it's a chicken. It's not an elephant. Walks like an elephant, quacks like an elephant. But for a large proportion of Donald Trump's support, it's not an elephant. I think the bloke who ended up at that pizza restaurant in New York that didn't have a basement, but which had a paedophile ring involving Hillary Clinton being run from its basement, I think he died this week. A tragic life that is. That's a story someone should tell in rather more detail than we currently have. So that's group number one. And then, I mean, there may be more than three groups, but then there's group number two, which I think I'm in, which is, and it's a weird group to be in because I presume there are subsets of this. There are people who are constantly frightened and furious about the direction of traffic in the Western world at the moment, or in the United States of America in particular. You look at this, you see despotism, you see a man prepared to lie, prepared to set raging mobs upon his own former colleagues. I mean, just utterly, utterly corrupt, morally, politically, professionally, personally, utterly, completely. And you don't... what would the word be? You don't know why other people don't share your sensibilities. You sort of thought, didn't you, growing up, that despots were bad. We were all taught, whether you want to refer back to Franco or Mussolini or Hitler or whoever it is, we were all taught, Stalin, we were all taught they were bad, right? And that these kind of tactics, these blatant lies, were anathema. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I kind of sometimes find myself wondering whether, when we were watching Star Wars in a cinema, half of the audience was actually rooting for Darth Vader without actually feeling confident enough to stand up and say so. But they're saying so now. So then you've got this second group of people who are, they're sort of divided between various levels of befuddlement, fear and anger, and clinging desperately to the notion that there is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hang on to the truth, yada, yada, you know all that. And then you've got the third group of people who don't care enough, or people who don't care at all. They're very different from the first group. The first group is full of people who you could describe as radicalized. The third group is people who are much more confusing to the second group. I can understand radicalized people. I can understand Peter doing all his own, quotes, research on the internet and ending up in a similar place to the bloke who turned up in New York looking for the basement of the pizza restaurant that didn't have a basement where Hillary Clinton was running her paedophile ring from. He did his own research on the internet as well. He thought that mainstream journalists were keeping the truth from the people. And Trump's part of that ecosystem. So you can understand how many people can end up in it when someone as powerful as Trump is creating it. Elon Musk's been shilling for Alex Jones this week, the man who lied about the sun. Nothing is sacred, is it? That's the phrase. Nothing is sacred anymore. Nothing matters. Everything is lost when lies and corruption triumph in this way. People who believe that they're not lies are in one camp. People who know that they are and despair are in the other. But then you've got the third. Category. The third category is people who don't care enough. How many people are in that group? People who care about the truth, people who believe the opposite of the truth. And then the people who don't care enough. I wonder if they, in some ways, are the most important constituency in this group of all. Because they're the ones that I find most confusing. I did something terrible. I made a terrible journalistic mistake about 18 months ago. I haven't told her yet, but I'll tell you, as long as you promise not to tell her. I remember when Emily went to America, was it about 18 months ago, when she did her first sort of visit to take the temperature of the American electorate. And she came on the line from the Emily Maitlis, my colleague, who of course now presents the Newsagents podcast. And I remember she came on the line, and I think the very first thing she said to me, and she's a much more informed, knowledgeable and expert chronicler of American politics than I will ever be. The first thing she said to me was the price of petrol. First thing she said to me is people are really cross about the cost of living. And that works for Trump. People feel that they're worse off than they were when Donald Trump was president, and that will be more important than anything else. And I thought, because I don't know as much about it, and I wasn't there, I thought, well, I wonder, really, Emily? That seems unlikely, given what we know. I mean, after January the 6th, after he tried to launch a coup on his own country, they still care more about the price of tea or the cost of petrol? And of course, she has been proven in some ways completely right. Her analysis was bang on then, bang on the day of the election, and it's bang on now. And maybe there's a bit of snobbery here, or a little bit of being out of touch. But I don't think it is. I don't think you can say to someone who's trying to defend Western civilization as we know it, that just because they're well off, they don't really understand what it's like. And that's why I support lying, corrupt despots. I think it's a great rhetorical tool for populists to use. Well, it's all very well for you in your nice house, isn't it? Sticking up for democracy. How would you feel if you were poor? You wouldn't be a Democrat. I think I'd still believe in democracy. I'd still believe it's bad to essentially set a murderous mob on your own vice president. I'd still believe it was bad to lie through your teeth about everything. I'm pretty sure I would. And that's what I don't understand. You know, we've been here for years now. A lot of you reminding me the bankruptcies, the allegations, the self-confessed sex offending, findings in US courts about his behaviours with women, all sorts of things. And we're still here. Why don't people care more? Why don't people care more? 0345 6060973. It becomes almost, why don't enough people care? Literally cheering back into the White House a man who I inarguably and irrefutably tried to steal it. And they're going to cheer him back in again. And I'm not sure I've got any better understanding of some of the mental machinations going on here than I had when he first decided to throw his hat into the political space. And there's the other stories that are going to disappear as well, all of the documents that he stole. That goes away now because you can't prosecute a sitting president. It's quite incredible. And the detail, whether you've been paying much attention or not, is hair-raising, you know? The big question, and I've read one article that answers it quite well, is the delays here. Why did they delay for so long to the point where the detail comes out after the election has happened? But I don't even think that matters. I think if this had come out before the election, there's a very compelling case for saying he'd have won by even more than he did. And again, which group is that? The group of people who've decided to believe things that aren't true because it comforts them, or the group of people that don't care enough because they care about other things more? I went up at the end of that sentence deliberately to make it sound like a question. I haven't turned into an Australian. They care about other things more? Like petrol? I mean, I don't know. Let's open up the phone lines. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. It's a bit of a freak decision, this, to have this conversation today. I would suggest it probably increases your chances of getting through early, but you never know. I never know until I drop the hammer in about 14 seconds' time. But why do you think stuff that 10 years ago we would almost all have said, this is absolutely shocking, this is absolutely unbelievable, this man is completely unfit for high office? Why do you think today majority of voters in America, well, not a majority, but an awful lot of people in the United States of America, and to a lesser extent here, just don't care about this stuff? I'm not talking about the people who don't believe it. I understand them. I would do another show another day on how on earth you reach people like our friend Peter. But the people who receive all the information don't really doubt all of the information and just don't care. Why don't they care? 0345 6060973. Because I think the pivotal points in history where the people who believe the things that aren't true end up in charge have more to do with the people who don't care than the people who do. It's when you can carry them with you that you get into palaces and presidential houses. It's when the people who don't really care decide to side with the people who believe the things that aren't true over the people who believe the things that are true. That's when the really bad stuff happens. 0345 Pizzagate, of course, was Washington, D.C., not New York. My first mistake of the day. Fake news. # fake news. 23 minutes after 10 is the number you need. Why don't people care more? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes after 10 is the time. And just as an early caveat, I need to remind you that you're watching Republican politicians and some of the world's richest people bend the knee. So when I say, why don't people care enough? And you say to me, because they're skint, I will very quickly remind you that they're not all skint. And the people with the most power, Zuckerberg, Musk, they could have actually mounted a sort of resistance. They own platforms so big and so powerful that they could have stood up for the truth, stood up for the things that I thought everybody cared about. And they have chosen not to. So why? Why do values that we were brought up to believe are inviolate and sacred not matter to huge swathes of the population? Initially in the United States of America, but latterly over here. Still a couple of phone lines free, so don't hang about. I know it's a big ask, but to be honest, I don't know. What do I think it is about myself that makes me think even if I was on my uppers, I wouldn't go down this road? I think the more attention you pay, the harder it is to believe that these people will improve your lives. I think that's probably what it is. I don't know whether that's history, politics, or philosophy. But the idea that my life is going to be improved because people are going to be even more horrible to people who aren't like me. I just don't think I'd ever quite fall for the... I don't know. Lewis is in Liverpool. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You okay?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
We're good. First of all, before I make my point, I want to say I'm not a fan of Trump.
Okay.
I want to make that clear before I start.
You don't have to, but I understand why you want to.
Okay. So you're asking why people aren't making up a big fuss about him going back in the White House?
Well, why they don't care?
They don't care, my mate. I'll tell you, because they've got their own problems. Now you're making some very strong points morally, and I agree with you actually. But the point is, right now, he's the best man for the job. I know. I'm not saying he's a good person. I'm not saying he's got a good character or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But practically, he'll speak to Putin, hopefully sort this business out in Ukraine. And as you say, people are worried about food. They are worried about the price of petrol. They are worried about the bill.
But why? I mean, let's take Putin into it then. You're talking about people who admire the attributes that Putin has. This is what I mean about Western values, sacred and inviolate, I thought, values. And I appreciate, I'm happy to sound naive. I think it's important to sound naive sometimes. We're not supposed to like dictators. I'm not talking about the next election. The election he's just won. I'm talking about the knowledge that he tried to steal the last one by encouraging Americans to kill Americans.
Yep.
How can you not care enough about that? I don't care how invested you are in the war in Ukraine. The man that seeks to lead the country encouraged Americans to kill Americans so that he could steal an election.
Right. And I'm not saying at any point he's a good person.
No, I know you're not.
The point is, right, I know you're clever, right, and I like your show, but James, you're not a politician. You're very good on the radio, my old mate. And, you know, this doesn't
mean anything. I'll ask you the question again. Why do people not care about a man who encouraged Americans to kill Americans trying to steal an election from the Americans?
Because he's the best man for the job.
Well, that doesn't mean anything.
It does, though. It does to them. It might not to you, and I know you're educated and clever. It might not to you.
Keep saying this stuff, because, I mean, it might not to you either, because you've said yourself that you're not a fan of Donald Trump. So you're speculating about a constituency of people that includes some of the richest people in America.
Yeah. So
because he appeals to the poor. You haven't answered my question. He's the best man for the job. Was Hitler the best man for the job?
Well, no, but he was the only man for the job. I mean,
Hitler was the best man for the job, mate. That's what people thought in 1930s Germany.
And they were wrong. But I'm not saying that, and they were wrong, weren't they? And people are probably but the problem is right now, you've got Biden, who, God bless him, isn't competent, is he?
Biden's wasn't even in the election battle. So you are saying the same thing that people would have said in 1930s Germany. You're just not quite ready to admit it yet.
No, you can't compare him to Hitler.
Of course I can. He tried to get Americans to kill Americans to steal an election from Americans. He mounted a violent assault on democracy itself. Who would you compare him to?
Well, I couldn't compare him to Hitler because you've gone too far. Because Hitler was one of the most evil people who's ever lived. He killed, what was it, 6 million Jews?
Not in the 1930s.
with 1939 when the Second World War started.
Compare him to 1936 Hitler. Compare him to 1935. I mean, what is it? You steal elections and you encourage Americans to kill Americans so that you can stay in power after you've been voted out. But he's the best man. But he's the best man. But he's the best man for the job. In a way, I don't think you're wrong. I'm just struck that you're reluctant to follow your own logic all the way to all the other hideous dictators in the recent past, or even in the distant past, who were considered to be the best man for the job. Did any of them ever turn out to be, Lewis? Can you think of any violent dictators who did turn out to be good for the country that they ran?
Well, no, but we haven't got. The thing is,
okay. No, it's all right. At least you're honest. But everyone thought they were the best men for the job as well. I don't know where the penny drops. I don't know where the scales fall from the eyes. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. I wonder whether Lewis has led us a little bit closer to the biggest answers to these questions than perhaps he intended. That maybe is it. These terrible, terrible people throughout history that end up in power, in this case, someone who encouraged Americans to attack other Americans in order to help him steal an election from Americans. So a fairly pithy little phrase, a pithy way of putting it, isn't it? People believe his lies, people know he's a liar, and then in the middle you have people who don't really care enough about the fact that he's lying because they have been persuaded that he will somehow be good for them. I'm still baffled by that. But that's how it happens, isn't it? You sit here, it wasn't just Jewish people and Roma people and homosexuals who were taken away by the Nazis. It was journalists and trades unionists. It was people who refused to bend. And I guess the numbers were quite small in the great scheme of things. Politicians who would have been furiously resistant of the rise of somebody like Trump would eventually bend the knee. You've seen it in the Republican Party, and now you've seen it in the world of commerce. Fascism and commerce always go hand in hand, largely because fascism historically is a political exercise designed to enrich the already rich. And if you're already rich, you're almost certainly involved in big business. So Trump and Musk now bending the knee to various degrees at the altar of Donald Trump, having in both case, well, no, Musk didn't own Twitter at the time, but in Zuckerberg's case, he banned Trump from his own platform because he knew they were lies. And now he doesn't care enough that they are lies. Why? Because he thinks he'll get richer. Why is Zuckerberg any different to Joe Schmo living in the boondocks? I think I'll get richer. Zuckerberg's probably right. He probably will get richer. I don't know that Joe Schmo is. As Jamie points out, your caller needs to look at the actual facts. The US economy is going better than any other. Strangely enough, Biden has been one of the most effective presidents in many decades. Infrastructure projects, manufacturing jobs, all brought back to America, inflation reduction, etc., etc., etc. Listen, I don't think anybody's ever going to defend the attempts to camouflage his mental decline. But in terms of the numbers, the stuff that is measurable, Jamie's right. So why don't people care more? Margaret is in Amsterdam. Margaret, what would you like to say?
Hi, people don't care because we've been taught not to care through populism. Populism works in a dichotomy. It's extremism. Either side, you're either for or you're against. There is no grey area. So if you're for, you're with it. You're there waving the flag and all the rest of it. If you're against, you can be against for such and such a time. And then it's exhausting. The flood through the media and everything, the flood of fake news, the flood of like Steve Bannon said,
Yeah, I know you're repeating him, but Ofcom aren't very fond of that word, so let's not use it again.
Yeah, well, they're flooding the zone with excrement,
yes,
sort of thing, And you can live in flooded zone of excrement, saying that in front of me is a poo going by down the river,
Yeah.
But if you're constantly living in that, it brings you down. So what do? You shut off. You stop listening to the news. You stop. You cannot actually afford to live in that sort of environment anymore. You talked yesterday about mental health. It's bad for your mental health. It's bad for everybody's mental health. So it's not that you're seeing. It's.
But then there's another dimension that because you're describing a kind of enforced ambivalence. I'm going to stop caring because caring is killing me. But then there's another gear by which you move from being. I'm just reading about one of the people who died at the January the 6th protests. Died of a heart attack before he even got there. And he used to be a Barack Obama fan. So there's a shift into ambivalence. But for some people, or even for those people, then there's a shift into actual support for the rather fetching images that you just conjured up. This is what I want to see out of my window. I'm loving the fact that I'm up to my ears in excrement. Yeah, that's the bit I don't think I'll ever get.
Well, yeah, I'm going to write a book about this one day. Good. It's usually by people that there's something else lacking in their lives.
I don't know that I'm comfortable with it. I've been doing this line for years, but
I know.
It sounds condescending. It sounds smug.
It does, doesn't it? Yes. It doesn't it? And it's not people that are stupid, and it's not people that are brain dead, and it's not people that don't have a life. It's because it's a feeling of community, and this is exactly what I'm talking about with populism.
Yes.
You have it builds a community. Populism builds a community, either for or against matters. It has no time for those in between. That's where you get dictators, like your last caller said. That's where you get dictators, because so many of the populace was for Hitler, because it was this sense of community, this sense of we'll get richer.
We will right historical wrongs, most obviously reparations. We will punish the people who've brought us low, most obviously Jews. And he's the best man for the job, as Lewis.
No, but he also got in because other people couldn't face that. So they just didn't vote. They just kept to themselves. They didn't utter a word. And that's the population that's really quiet at the moment, because they don't know where to go.
Also, you remind us, Margaret, that there are millions of people in the categories that we're seeking to examine. So the motivation of a normal person with a normal family leading a normal life in I don't know, Idaho, is not going to be the same as the motivation of the people whose names that we know, the billionaires, the richest people in the world, who've gone from literally banning him from their platform because his lies are obvious and dangerous, to signing up 110% for everything he stands for and everything he offers. Their motivation is probably easier to unpick. They are never going to have enough, and they will always want more. And that's Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg.
That is
and
true.
Jeff Bezos.
But for the poorer people, not the captains of industry, etc., it's more difficult to understand. And there I give you the solution. It's community, and that's exactly what populism does. It builds
makes you feel
community.
At home, makes you feel part of something, which of course we saw on January the 6th. I wonder whether, Emma suggests, it's not that people are lacking. They're angry and vengeful. And that makes them easily misdirected by demagogues and grifters. There's probably, again, we're not going to get one answer that fits all of the people. Elon Musk seems angry and vengeful, oddly. And the more you learn about his life, the easier it becomes to understand why he might be. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't immediately seem angry and vengeful, but possibly to be that driven, you need to be in possession of demons that most of us happily are not in possession. I don't know, but some amazing insights there from Margaret. 10:42 is the time. Lee is in Castle Donington in Derbyshire. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
I want to really talk about the nature of truth now and lying.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of get carried away a little bit as to whether people believe what people believe and what they don't. And I think truth, over the past few years certainly, has become more subjective, in that we just, rather than believing what we believe, what we think is true and what we don't think is true, we tend to just believe what we like the sounds of.
Yes. Well, that's what alternative facts was designed to achieve, isn't it?
Quite, yeah.
And to give people permission to believe their own versions of things, even in direct contradiction of observable evidence. Absolutely.
And it's not just Trump, obviously, although he's Trump and his kind, and Elon and the rest of those have contributed to it as well. But we've seen it in this country, with Boris and Brexit and all these other things, is that people just choose what they want to believe rather than what they know to be true. And I know you were speaking a moment ago about there are sort of three categories of people, the people that do believe it. And again, I think there are people that do believe this stuff genuinely. There are people that don't believe it, but they'll go along with it anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe because it
we missed them out, didn't we? I think that describes most of the Republican Party movement. They must be holding their noses, but they're bending their knee at the same time.
Well, they are, and that's because they're self-interested, and they go along with or support what they think will benefit them personally the most. And it might be their own
That's
career.
very easy to, oddly, the higher profile you are, the easier you are to understand. There is personal advancement in it. There is personal enrichment. There is professional preferment. Or there is, he's going to make regulations. He's going to punish your commercial foes. He's going to punish your foreign governments who are insisting that you take down disgusting images from your social media platform or stop using it to incite riots or whatever it may be. It's possibly easier to see what people who've got a lot have to gain from throwing their lot in with a despot or a dictator. It's harder to see what ordinary people get, but it's just a watered down version of the same thing. Whether it's true or not, they believe they're going to get a payout.
Well, I think so, yeah, and I think as well when you look at what all the campaign things and the promises, he's even broken them before he's even got into office.
But it doesn't matter, does it?
Gas, the cheaper groceries, whatever it might be. And I think I hope I'm not being insulting to Americans particularly, but I think there is a certain element anyway, at least, that are quite inward-looking, really, and they're really, if somebody promises that, eggs are going to go down, or gas, or whatever it might be.
Well, nothing else really matters, and it does sound condescending, doesn't it?
It does, and of course that doesn't apply to all Americans by any means.
No, but it applies to enough. It applies to enough. You should care more about these things. I'm reminded of when The Guardian had a letter writing campaign to write to Americans telling them not to re-elect George W. Bush. And even at the time, even as a soon-to-be fully paid-up member of the liberal elite, I thought that's not going to work. Imagine if you got a letter off someone in a foreign country telling you how to vote in your election. That's not going to work. That's why it's condescending. It can be true and condescending at the same time.
Yeah.
That's quite worrying, isn't it? The idea that you should care more about these things. Yeah, but I don't, pal. Buster,
well,
mate.
No, but and now we've not got people writing letters to us, but what we have got is people with social media platforms telling us how to think.
Yeah. And trying to interfere in UK politics, up to and including a Daily Mail columnist the other day calling for America to buy Britain, which is quite a turnaround from the days of Brexit. And Brexit possibly is Castle Donington in Leicestershire, not Derbyshire.
It's on the border. So depending on whereabouts you are, yeah.
So your switchboard must have come up as Derbyshire, because a couple of people are pointing out that they thought it was in Leicestershire. But there we go, we've cleared it up. It's on the border. I don't know. I mean, there it is. One man's condescension is another man's fact. It's 10:46. I'll read you some more of the detail, particularly about the violence of January the 6th being foreseeable to Mr. Trump after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
9 is the time. I've explored the idea. I mean, the cop-outs, the excuses when people do really bad things. More I think the territory of the historians and the social scientists. We touched on it with grooming gangs last week. The idea that, so do you know, one of the forces, I think it was Rotherham, I should probably double check, one of the forces in the middle of this scandal did an identity parade that involved one black man and then 8 people with blacked up faces. And yet these are the people that we're supposed to believe were being worried about being called racist. I feel a little bit similar about claims that, you've got no idea why people are voting for Donald Trump. It's because they're poor. Well, okay, talk to me about the people who aren't poor. There's millions of them as well. Why don't they care more about the sort of thing that has come out overnight in Jack Smith's report? Scott Lucas is the Professor of American Politics at University College Dublin and has had a right old look at the report, 140-odd pages. Did you learn anything, Scott?
Yeah, I did. I mean, we knew a lot of the individual acts that went into Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election. And these are set out in Smith's report, which is, for example, the pressure on state governors and legislators to overturn their results. Yeah. The construction of fake electors. In other words, these electors would be parachuted into Washington to vote for Trump in the Electoral College, replacing the legitimate electors that would have voted for Joe Biden. The attempts to install someone as Attorney General at the head of the Justice Department to declare the election fraudulent. The attempt to get Mike Pence, the vice president, to block the certification of Joe Biden as president. And then, as you've been detailing quite effectively, the instigation of those people to march on the Capitol and, quote, stop the steal when Pence would not do that. To the point, and I'll just remind, your listeners of this, where they're charging through the Capitol, threatening to execute legislators and Donald Trump's own vice president, hang Mike Pence. That's how close we were to not only the violence that occurred on January the 6th, but even more of that in what was a coup attempt. That's the phrase I would use for it.
And he ignored repeatedly. How much of this is in the report? The importuning of colleagues and family members to somehow call the mob off.
So when, as people were charging to the Capitol, Donald Trump, who had just given that speech, earlier in front of the White House telling them, fight like hell, he goes into the White House dining room and he watches the coverage for about 2 to 3 hours with people telling him, you've got to do something, you've got to do something. He refuses to bring in the National Guard. He refuses to call Mike Pence, who at that point is hiding in the Capitol. He refuses to issue a statement calling on his supporters to leave the Capitol. He finally does a video late afternoon, but he calls them patriots and says, as patriots. So he actually praises them as patriots. And then that evening, as they finally are evicted from the Capitol, so the Capitol's been secured, Trump and his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, are back on the phones trying to get senators and representatives to still block the certification of Joe Biden. In other words, still trying to block the constitutional process.
He did everything within his power to steal that election.
Oh, absolutely. And what is clear in Smith's report that takes out the last prop from Trump is, because people say, well, Trump genuinely thought this. And Smith details very carefully, and this is why the report's important, that Trump knew he had lost, that he was told by his lawyers, he was told by Republican senators, he was told by officials repeatedly, you've lost, to the point on January 3rd, 3 days before the Capitol attack, he says, well, we've got to hand this to the next guy. In other words, we've got to hand this to Biden. But he still put this out there. But of course, for the subsequent 4 years to where we are today, James, and as you have excellently been identifying, the facts about this and the facts about what in effect was a coup attempt, in part they're buried by misinformation and disinformation, and in part they're pushed aside because people have other concerns. And I think the two that are important here to discuss are the economy and immigration, which themselves are wrapped up in a lot of misinformation and disinformation.
So if you believe Trump's rhetoric on immigration, then you might give him a free pass on trying to get his own vice president killed, not to be crass.
Absolutely. And to actually give you the statistic, maybe it'll surprise your listeners out there that in 2024, immigration, undocumented immigrants across the U.S.-Mexico border fell by 61%. Here's another fact on the economy. The U.S. inflation rate in 2024 is below 3% compared to between 9 and 10% in 2022. Petrol prices, which are usually the marker for how Americans feel about their economy, compared to 2022 are down 40%. But how many times did you hear those statistics during the campaign as opposed to what people felt?
Yes, that's exactly it, isn't it? It does. So the facts don't touch the sides of the feelings, if the feelings are so carefully cultivated. And an earlier caller reminded us of Steve Bannon's comments about flooding the zone back in the day. And that's what you're referring to when you talk about the facts being drowned out by the, we'll call them alternative facts, so that people end up thinking that there's a sort of equivalence, an equivalence of objectivity between two completely contradictory positions.
Well, let's take two very quick cases. Let's go to the U.S. and then let's bring it back here on what's happening this morning. In the United States, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, all reporting on the report, as they should. Most right-wing attack sites, Breitbart, One American News Network, News Nation, Red State, they just aren't mentioning this report at all. And Fox News uses the headline, Department of Justice strategically dropped special counsel report at midnight, shows how Americans saved Trump, which is an interesting reading of that report. Let's bring it back to the UK. And as I go through the UK, certain news outlets this morning, once again, I'm getting misinformation, disinformation, minute by minute about grooming gangs. And why am I getting that? Because since January 1st, and I've just written about this, I've documented how it started, a man named Elon Musk, supporting the Reform Party, and Nigel Farage, has effectively been trying to overthrow the UK government. And I mean overthrow the UK government using misinformation and disinformation.
Where can we read what you've written?
That is published in Byline Times, and I thank them for the opportunity to do that. And a longer version of the piece is also published on EA Worldview, which is the news and analysis site I run.
I look forward to reading that. I really do. And I hesitate to ask you the next question. It's a combination. You can pick either side of this one, which is a combination of what happens next. And can you see a route back to what we might loosely describe as normality?
So, what we face, well, in this country, we face whether the fact that people will actually cut through the misinformation and ask for a legitimate examination of the facts around the issues that concern us. In the United States, we face Donald Trump taking office on January 20th, and his words, not mine, pledging to act like a dictator on day one.
Yeah.
We face Donald Trump putting in political appointees at U.S. departments to either break them or make them bend to his will. That's defense, that's healthcare, that's economic departments. We face his alliance with Elon Musk to systematically attack those whom they don't like as political enemies. And we face the possibility that many, many people will be deported without benefit of resort to law. That's just starters. Trump could come out of NATO, and responding to one of your earlier callers, let's be very clear about what this means for Ukraine and Russia. Donald Trump has supported Vladimir Putin since 2016, when Russia did cooperate to get Trump elected. And Donald Trump has supported the Kremlin's line on any negotiations with Ukraine, which effectively endorses Russia taking over more than 25% of that country.
Any grounds for optimism?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And I'm going to tell you why, James.
Thank God for that, Scott.
I mean, I've got a family which is all over the map. I've got Trumpist. I've got an apocalyptic millennial. I've got never Trumpers. I've got Democrats. But more importantly, if you get to Americans at the grassroots level and what they're doing in their local communities, what are they concerned about? They're concerned about jobs, healthcare, education, transport, and they're concerned about decency. When you get them to talk about their communities, you've got to get back and try to reach out to those Americans and engage in discussion with them. And remember that America is this diverse country of 50 states, and that if you get below the white noise of social media to try to engage in dialogue rather than division and decency rather than confrontation, I'm still going to stick with darkest before the dawn here.
Well, you have to, don't you? The alternative is intolerable, I think.
There's a guy named James Baldwin, and I know we got to leave. I'll leave you with this, and you might remember where I'm going to go with this. It says, "I choose to be an optimist. I choose to be an optimist because the alternative is to give up on humanity." And I'm not ready to give up on humanity quite yet.
There you go. And it's not hyperbole to be talking in these tones. And writers like Baldwin kind of understood the human condition in ways that the rest of us can be awestruck by. Scott Lucas, thank you. I'll try and post some links on my Blue Sky account to the article you referred to, Professor of American Politics at University College Dublin.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It was a very powerful James Baldwin quote that that Scott shared with us a moment ago. Here's another one. It is not truth that matters, but victory. What luck for rulers that men do not think. It is not truth that matters, but victory. What luck for rulers that men do not think. Usually when I've got a quote filed away somewhere in the back of my head, it turns out not to be true. I don't think there's any evidence of John Maynard Keynes ever having said, when the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? But it's such a beautiful quote. You almost sort of wish there was. I think that one's for real. I know the second part of it definitely is. What luck for rulers, or how fortunate it is for rulers that men do not think. I think the first bit is as well. It is not truth that matters, but victory, which kind of sums up the conversation that we had in the last hour. I'm not going to tell you who said that, but I'm going to cautiously suggest that you can probably guess. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I think we'll take one or two more calls on the specifics of what is going on in America and the confusion in the United States of America, forgive me, and the confusion that many of us feel about that. Scott's statistics with regard to undocumented immigration and indeed economic performance and inflation were very arresting. It turns that old dictum on its head, doesn't it? You remember that people started saying a while ago, facts don't care about your feelings. People who generally thought that they were on the side of facts, whereas in fact they were very much in the business of stoking up feelings. We're clearly in the space now where the feelings don't care about your facts. And I think it was right, it was correct of Scott to bring Elon Musk's lies about grooming gangs into the picture as well, because the feelings there are so easily and understandably, who doesn't feel incredibly disgusted by some of the reports on some of the crimes that were committed in that era and may still be being committed now. But to use that as a justification for telling lies about what prosecutors did or what responses certain politicians have made is objectively disgusting. And speaking of statistics, I was looking into this at the weekend. I think it's 83% of what would be called group-based child sex abuse is, of course, committed by white men. But you never hear Elon Musk complaining about that. But I digress. Back to, for a while, the question of what gives people, what allows people to turn away or close their eyes to things like, and in the case of Donald Trump, the latest thing that they need to turn away from is evidence of his attempts to steal the 2020 election. And that I just want to read you something before we go to Jason, who's in God's own country of Hagley. The violence on January the 6th was foreseeable to Mr. Trump, who had remarked just the evening before that his supporters were angry and who, to cheers of invade the Capitol building and take the Capitol, had told those supporters during his ellipse speech to, quote, show strength and be strong. When he told them, quotes, we're not going to let it happen, the crowd chanted, fight for Trump. And when he warned his gathered supporters, quotes, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, end quotes, the crowd marched to the Capitol in response. Indeed, officials and advisors close to Mr. Trump recognized and voiced their concerns over this high potential for election-related violence. On January 4th, a senior advisor explicitly warned co-conspirator 2, some of the people in the report are not identified, that if Mr. Pence unilaterally rejected legitimate electoral votes, it would cause riots in the streets. Co-conspirator 2 replied that there had previously been points in the nation's history where violence was necessary to protect the republic. And alongside that, alongside the incitement of the mob, you have a lot of evidence in the report of the pressure being brought to bear on officials, public officials, governors and the like, to lie, to hand numbers back to Washington that were simply not true, or to send people instructed by the voters in their state to vote for Joe Biden, to send people who would instead vote for Donald Trump, who had not achieved a majority in there. I mean, absolutely incredible, right? And I can sit here. I could go off on another one. It was a 20-minute introduction at 10 o'clock. I could just go off again now, listing all of these things that have actually happened and asking not what's going on in the minds of people who've convinced themselves that they didn't happen, because I understand that. But what's going on in the minds of people who don't care and who probably would have done once? I don't know. One of the men who died on January the 6th was a former Barack Obama fan. So that ecosystem of misinformation and lies, very deliberate, of course. Steve Bannon, who's a key figure in the founding of Breitbart, described it as flooding the zone with excrement so that people don't know what's true and what's not true anymore. Who does that benefit? People telling the truth or liars? Think about it. If I create an ecosystem in which you can't tell what's true and what's not true, who benefits most? The people lying to you or the people telling you the truth? It's not exactly rocket science, is it, to bring Elon Musk back into the conversation? Jason is in Hagley. Jason, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome. Adrian Child's country, as we call Hagley.
Absolutely, and he's regularly over the road in the same pub as me. But anyway, I digress. I'm lucky enough to spend, a reasonable amount of time in the States. So this year I've been through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, into Texas in the autumn as well. And I want to talk to you about observations rather than opinions.
Sure.
I mean, my sort of political leanings are certainly to the right of yours, but I like to think of myself as a really good liberal.
Sure.
And Americans, when you go over there, are always very happy to talk, wherever you are. It's what I love about America. Whether in a bar, restaurant, in a hotel, in the street, at a tram stop, everyone's happy to talk, and everyone's happy to share their opinions very, very fulsomely and very clearly with you.
Yes.
And great listening to the Professor before, great listening to the quotations coming across. I want to give you another quotation, and it's from Ronald Reagan. I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And I think that that's very much the basis for the American psyche. So, if I may, forget about all the details, forget about all the misinformation, forget about all the statistics. Let's talk about the fundamental American psyche of a country born in blood that rejected the tyranny of the British violently, and
made up entirely of immigrants.
Yeah, absolutely, and a country that I think has a healthy, a healthy disregard for state power,
and yet they want to start. They want to start purging foreigners. You can't do that without an incredibly powerful state.
This is the wonderfully counterintuitive thing about it, James. And this is why I say this is an observation rather than an opinion.
Of course.
I think so many people over there before the election, and I was in Texas just after as well. And the whole American psyche is the rejection of the power of the state. And I just got the impression from talking to so many people that they see the Democrats as absolutely representing the power of the state, the tyranny of the state. And yet I sit there with my wife after I've had these conversations. I say, so they want to reject the tyranny of the state, but they want to vote for a tyrant, which I just find
they want to give the state more power than it has, and remove their own right to remove the tyrant.
And you see,
potentially,
this is incredible for me to have these conversations with rational people. Some people who are running large businesses over there. A lot of people who are just working in, on pretty menial jobs. The guy that ran the firehouse at the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, he's got some great opinions on this. Obviously, not those sorts of opinions, but you have all of these eclectic conversations with people, and very ingrained in America is the rejection of state power.
But that would always have been true.
Vote for a tyrant.
Yeah, I know, and it's counterintuitive. It's cognitive dissonance. It's a million fancy words, but it's always been true, and you could use it as a rationale to explain, I think, to be generous rather than excuse, how someone like Reagan or either of the Bushes could achieve power, but as something that allows people to ignore this scale of corruption. I don't think it quite works. It sounds a little bit too much like a bit of an excuse for doing something awful. You're talking about not just the felonies, not just the self-confessed sex offending or the libel trial over the woman who says that she raped him. And of course, she was successful in that trial. And now the evidence that he tried every trick in the book, every wriggle, every wrinkle of government power while he still held some to try to steal an election from the people. I think you're right to describe a psyche that we probably struggle to fully understand on this side of the Atlantic. But it doesn't, that it doesn't reach the space, I don't think, where I can see grounds for excusing all of the things we've just listed.
And I agree with you. Because.
But they think it do. They think it does. They think it.
Well, let me.
That's psychology, isn't it? That's psychology.
That's more fundamental than this. Is that you and I will You and I will believe that.
I think I just misspoke. I said the woman in the rape case says he raped her. I think I said she raped him, which would be in need of correction. Go on.
You and I come from from this political system that we're in, and the sort of liberal
and the same glorious corner of the West Midlands, Jason.
Absolutely. Although I'm sure we will disagree about a whole heap of things.
I hope so.
But we agree. But we agree, I think, on the fundamental issues about how we feel about Trump. But it's so strong what I got over there, particularly in places like Georgia and South Carolina, that the Democrats, they're almost seen as the devil.
Sure.
And you could have put anybody up, and it's not them. If you can vote for somebody that's not them, that's enough. And we're not talking about a marginal victory here. We're talking about a landslide. And that goes beyond simply saying that people have been misinformed on
for sure. I mean, in the context of total
deeper into the psyche.
Total votes, it's not the popular vote. It's not a landslide, but in the context of electoral college votes, it is, and that fits with the really weird bit that I don't think either of us could fully unpick. But you're closer to doing so than I am. If this report had come out earlier, he'd have done even better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same counterintuitive thing that a lot of people I speak to moan about violent crime.
Yeah.
And yet they look at us and say, but we can't have gun control. It's exactly the same.
Two countries, what did Oscar Wilde say? Two countries divided by a common language.
Yeah.
Crikey. Is it the Littleton that you sup in for a pint of Baden's?
No, the King Arthur.
And the other
Baden's is the absolute nectar, yeah.
Jason, thank you. Making me homesick. 16 minutes after 11 is the time you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're going to move into different but similar territory after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
The thing that is interesting, I get a few messages saying, ha, loving this. James's brain's going to explode and all. Listen, that's fine. I'm glad you're listening. But you need at some point to tell me what it is you're celebrating apart from the discomfort of someone like me. Because once you've taken the truth off the table, everything goes. In the context of these terrible fires sweeping Los Angeles at the moment, Donald Trump is telling incredible lies. He's blaming a little fish. He's yelling at fish, you could argue. And I don't know whether he knows it's nonsense or not, but even the most cursory understanding of the most basic issues would teach you that it was nonsense. But it doesn't matter, does it? Once you've created an arena, and this is why Jason's point is possibly strong, this hatred of government, the only people who benefit from a population that hates government per se, as opposed to a particular or a specific government, are the people whose activities are curtailed by governments, i.e. criminals, whether they're billionaires or whether they're drug dealers and robbers. They are people who really benefit from the hatred of government, the hatred of authority, are criminals. Either, as I say, the white-collar criminals, the morally corrupt, uber greedy, or the more traditional and obvious criminals. They all benefit from a hatred of authority. That's why you have looting at times like this, when the authorities loses its grip on a situation. They're also lying about looting, of course, because you can lie about anything now, anything and everything, up to and including watching fellow Americans die or lose everything they own in Los Angeles, and telling lies about your political opponents, even there, telling lies about observable facts, claiming that the flow of water into Northern California has been deliberately stemmed as a consequence of attempts to protect a fish. So Donald Trump is yelling at fish. And here we are. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. And the other thing that fits into this space, I hesitate to remind you of Liz Truss's existence, but remind you I must. Liz Truss has given an interview in which she actually says these words. So the one thing on which everybody agrees in the context of the grooming gangs story, the one thing on which everybody agrees is that it has been reported on for over 15 years, and specifically for the 11 or 12 years since Andrew Norfolk of the Times newspaper kind of led the line, and we in this programme of course could get in immediately on exactly the same stories at exactly the same time, because we rely upon so much of print media for our conversations on the programme. Everyone agrees that the Times did a brilliant job on this, except Liz Truss, who's given an interview in which she says, "We have got a massive problem with the British media, which is they don't focus on the important issues, whether it's the grooming gangs that they have failed to hold bureaucrats and police officers to account on." I'd remind you, Liz Truss was not only in government, I think more than any other minister after 2010, she was also Prime Minister for a period. But apparently it's the fault of, well, I'll carry on, whether it's the debt crisis that we now have in our country, which you can read about everywhere, with the highest levels of guild borrowing. I know it's guilt, she said guild, or the highest rates of borrowing since the 1990s. They're not focused on that. I've seen it on at least 3 front pages. But anyway, they're focused on ludicrous stories about MPs, when MPs are simply doing their job. That is a massive problem, and the country will not be fixed until they get fixed. Here it comes. The left-wing media of Britain, including the BBC, including organisations like The Times and The Guardian and the Financial Times, do not like free speech. So the newspapers that described Liz Truss's fiscal catastrophe as the finest thing since sliced bread, they're all fine, they're great. Ones that explain why it was all going to go belly up, they're disgusting and left-wing. And The Times, which did more to report on the grooming gangs than any other media outlet in the country, including this one, The Times is part of the problem because it doesn't focus on the important issues, whether it's the grooming gangs or the highest levels of guild borrowing. Listen, you won't believe me when I say what I'm about to say. And I hesitate almost to say it because I don't think it will sound authentic. I don't think it will sound sincere. I don't think Liz Truss is terribly well. I mean, you could sit here until you're blue in the face doing what we just did with Donald Trump and trying to work out what her motivations are, but he gets to be president. There's no real mystery there. And I know there is a relatively lucrative circuit of grifting on the far-right adjacent fringes of American politics, which of course are not the fringes anymore. They're front and centre. But if you were looking for a keynote speaker who's going to come out with this kind of bilge and claptrap, Liz Truss wouldn't even make your top 10. You've got members of the administration. You've got Farage on this side of the Atlantic. You've got all sorts of people. Liz who? Why is she doing this? Why is she pursuing such obvious... Is it just that she's not very good at it? So we talked a lot about populism in the last hour, and we're about to talk about it again, and trying to unravel the riddle of Liz Truss and her incredible decline. A really hideous decline, actually. And again, the curse of the empathetic liberal is that you end up actually feeling sorry for someone who would probably not cross the road to help you if you were on fire. But you end up feeling sorry for someone in such obvious public turmoil. But is it just that she's trying really hard to be a populist and she's just not very good at it? Just as she tried really hard to be a prime minister and she was just not very good at it. Just as she tried really hard to be a Liberal Democrat at one point and she was just not very good at it. She's tried to be lots of things in her life, Liz Truss, and I'm not aware of anything that she's proved to be, well, very good at. So is it just now that she's trying to be a populist demagogue? She's trying to be a kind of far-right rabble-rouser and she's not very good at that either? I don't know, and I'm not yet minded to have a whole hour on the mysterious machinations of Liz Truss's public decline. But there it is, giving another interview to another platform in which she is describing the Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times, the owner of Fox News' biggest British newspaper, reputationally, if not circulation-wise, as being left-wing. It's just incredible, isn't it? I love it. So what are we going to talk about next? We'll talk about young people, well, younger than me. And I think Jason provided us at the end of the conversation about Donald Trump with a really helpful insight into what we could loosely describe as the American psyche and the things that, and with that absolutely important caveat of cognitive dissonance. So these people, a lot of people believe that they don't like strong government or they don't like government, and yet they end up being supportive of people who've boasted about dictatorial ambitions. You don't get bigger government than that. How big do you think the government is in Russia? So younger people age, and this is a very specific question that you can either answer from the point of view of, well, I think that people my age, I think people in my age categories are like this because, even though I'm not one of them, because 4 out of 5 people aged between 18 and 45 will not be in this category. But 1 out of 5 adults aged between 18 to 45 will be in this category. And you can ring me as well. You can tell me why you would prefer to have a strong, unelected leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. I don't know how many people we'll get from the second category, but we should be able to get plenty from the first, because that just involves analysing the tides that we've watched come in and out in recent years. But I didn't realise it was going back quite so far, going back appropriately enough to the year that Tony Blair came to power. Here's the question. The best system for running a country effectively is a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. And before we all get on our high horse, I think we've all thought this in some way at some time. Wouldn't it be nice if someone could just get things done? And then you have arguments about what you would want to get done. Has there ever been such a thing as a benign dictator in history? Would the Romans be able to lay claim to some benign dictatorships? They weren't technically dictatorships, I don't suppose. Well, elements were, some eras were. But a benign dictator, I don't have the history, never mind the Latin, to say with confidence that it's... But you understand the appeal. So here is somebody who's going to do all of those things that you want to happen, even though some people don't want to happen. There's going to be a massive redistribution of wealth. There's going to be a huge increase in free education. The NHS is going to be absolutely ring-fenced. Where are we going to get the money from? Wherever we want, because we're dictators. We're going to get the money. Everybody who's worth over X gazillion will just have a zero knocked off their fortunes. Otherwise, they'll have to shut down their operations in this country. They'll still be the richest people in the yada yada, whatever it is. Or, of course, the alternative is we're going to round up all the people of a religion that we don't like and we're going to gas them. Or we're going to round up all the Roma, we're going to round up all the trades unionists and we're going to gas them too. That is also something you can do when you're a dictator. So just pause for a minute to remember that when somebody says they quite like the idea of a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections, they're not necessarily Nazis. They might quite like the idea of a strong leader who doesn't bother with elections in pursuit of delivering things that they want that are nice and good and generous and equable and decent and moral. It could cut both ways. So we've all had that thought. What would be the best way to run a country? A benign dictatorship. What does that mean? Well, then the problems start. Has there ever been one? It's a genuine question. You could possibly answer it in the course of answering the question I'm about to ask you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Because here's the question. Why is this figure so much higher, exponentially higher, 3 times higher, give or take, or at least twice as high among the youngest adults in the country? Why are the youngest adults in the country 2 or 3 times more likely to be attracted to the idea of a dictatorship than the rest of us? And it's only relatively recently, 45, 53, no, that's not true, but it's only in the second half of my time at LBC that I've been on the wrong side of this one, or the right side of this one. When I say younger people, 18 to 45, twice or 3 times as likely as their older family members, friends, colleagues, to welcome the idea that the best system for running a country effectively is a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections. So if you take people born in 1997 as becoming relatively conscious of the world in what, 2007, would you say? 2010, let's say. 13 years old. Does that seem reasonable? 2010? I don't know. Why would they be... What's happened between, so if you get 1981, put another 13 years on 1994, what's happened since the mid-90s that means younger people are quite, or 2 to 3 times as many young people quite fancy the idea of a dictatorship than their older relatives? And if it's you I'm talking about, why do you think it is? Why do you think that a dictatorship would be a better way of running a country effectively than having elections? 0345 6060 973. This isn't, I don't think, you don't need to be as informed as you were in the last hour. We had some incredible but this one is an absolute gut shot, isn't it? It could be anything. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. Something to do with the internet? Yeah. You can't say that as an answer to everything. And why, if it is that, why are 4 at 5 still not persuaded. So what is it about the 18 to 45-year-olds that makes them 2 or 3 times more likely to quite like the idea of a dictatorship than the rest of us? 0345 6060 973. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:35. You are a young person, Edward. You may not feel that way, but at 38, you fit very much into the category of 18 to 45-year-olds. And Edward writes, I can see the appeal of benign dictatorships, getting rid of the electoral system. The current electoral cycle makes it nearly impossible to enact the major changes that we need in society. Once you're elected, you've already got one eye on the next election, so it's easier to kick the can down the road. I mean, that is a very powerful point. Part of the reason why I think Winston Churchill, was it, who described democracy as the least bad available option. But it doesn't explain why being aged 18 to 45 will make you 2 or 3 times more warmer towards the notion of dictatorship than the older generations. Maybe they're more original thinkers. People have mentioned Marcus Aurelius, a very visionary philosopher emperor. You may know him from his film Gladiator and Gladiator 2. I don't know. Does he count as a benign dictator? Were Roman emperors dictators in the sort of technical sense? I should know the answer to that, shouldn't I? Parents should get a refund for all the school fees. And someone has suggested that an early leader in Singapore may have qualified as a benevolent dictator, but I suppose then we're going to have an argument about what benevolent means. But I'm more interested in the generational question here, why the 18 to 45-year-olds are 2 or 3 times more likely to think that this might be a better way of running a country than having actual elections. What's happened in that era, in that generational era, that, in your view, explains this difference of opinion? A lot of you are asking whether or not there's a gender breakdown on this, and I can tell you that there is. But it's not as big as you might have thought, actually. A strong leader who doesn't have to bother with elections in the relative age categories, well, 19... Where are we for men and women? Just bear with me 1 second. The males are 16 and the females are 13% overall in all categories. I haven't got a gender breakdown by age. I've got the male and female breakdown, and then I've got the age breakdowns, but I don't have the gender breakdown by age. So the gap between men and women on this is not as big as you might have expected, and I'm surprised by that as well. 38 after 11 is the time. Mohammed is in Ealing. Mohammed, what do you reckon?
Good morning there, James.
Hello.
I hope you're doing well, buddy. As always,
complain.
You're doing a great show.
You're very kind. Thank you.
What I wanted to say, I'm of the personally of opinion that dictatorship wouldn't work. However, having young children and speaking to a lot of young people, that includes family and different people from work and etc., there is an idea or an ideology from young people thinking that all their aspirations, all their dreams are completely and utterly over.
Yeah.
If you look at the normal young person, they go to primary school, secondary school, they do their GCSEs or GMVQs, go to uni, come out of uni about 30, 40,000 in debt, can't find a job, can't live, scrounging around. Then they go into crime, potentially drugs, and then they go out of control. And then they look at,
And oddly, the people who haven't had that experience but have ended up somehow doing okay, they might welcome a dictatorship as well, because it's the only way that they can be protected from the people that you've just described.
Exactly. If you look at it, James, I love the UK, but I'm from a Somalian background, and when I was growing up in the UK, as long as I told
How
you,
old are you?
I'm 38 now. I was born in 86.
Yeah.
80s boy. And, I look, even when I'm walking around London, great city, you just look at people, they're all upset. You look at how many young people are homeless on our great streets in the capital.
That was more in... when did I start university? In the early 90s. There were actual shanty towns in London squares. I mean, before your time. But and I don't think that prompted desire, and also you're worrying about other people when you talk about homelessness. I think that most people drawn to the notion of a benign dictatorship may be thinking about themselves. But what you've described in some ways is a dearth, even a death of hope. We've talked about this a lot, and my age is really relevant. With 15 years between us, when I left higher education, I still thought the world was my oyster.
Yeah.
Now, that would be a very, very, very rare feeling indeed, wouldn't it?
It's absolutely rare. I mean, I was speaking to one of my cousins the other day, and she was like, "Mohammed, what can I do?" She just finished uni last year. Yeah. She was like, "I'm almost in 30 grand, yeah. I can't get a job for the qualifications I got. I can't get a job for the qualifications I don't got. I've got to pay this off." And then she's gone onto the benefit system, and that's someone who's gone throughout the whole system,
So this system isn't working. We need something else. And maybe it's because it's sclerotic. It's because, anybody who wants to set out and do something could have it undone for 4 or 5 years later. I mean, it doesn't. I'm sure your cousin isn't flirting with dictatorships as a preferable mode of government, but it speaks to the same problem, doesn't it? The idea that this isn't, and that's Trump again. We're back to the last hour. This just isn't working for me, and therefore this must be better.
And then the gap, the problem, which sickens me, James, to the core, like literally sickens me, is that when we had the election back in the summer, I thought there's going to be I know change takes time, but I thought the government could have done certain changes that would have had an immediate impact on the public and on citizens. However,
did you? What?
Yeah. Like, for example, the two-child poverty benefit cap, hiring more nurses.
They did say in the election they weren't going to do that.
I know, but I think that,
I think they did. They may not have done. But yeah, you haven't had an announcement that made you think, here are the new lot, they're nothing like the old lot.
Look at, for example, 1997 when New Labour came in. We've had, on the second day or the first day, we had the Bank of England independency. We had child benefit being increased. We had the poverty team. As Tony Blair did some errors in terms of foreign policy, but in my lifetime, in terms of domestic policy, he's arguably the best out of the bunch.
Well, the green energy stuff, the nationalisation of the railways. I mean, there are quite a few things that somebody would point to, but I'm not arguing with you because you don't feel that they have reached you in the way that you would want to have been reached, and they're all quite broad and nebulous. They don't automatically change anybody's day-to-day experience. And yeah, I mean, I hear you. I'm not going to argue with you on that one. I'm intrigued at the same time, thank you, Mohammed, by the other conversation that's popped up in the background on whether or not there has ever been a benign dictator. Mike knows his history. Marcus Aurelius, James, was indeed a philosopher emperor. He was an absolute monarch backed by the military who personally ordered several genocides but did feel bad about it. That's beautifully put. He wrote entire meditations, didn't he, old Marcus Aurelius, about various things, including feeling bad about the genocides that he had ordered. And as I said, you can find out more about Marcus Aurelius in his famous films Gladiator and Gladiator 2. Tito gets a vote from Ovella. I don't know, again, enough about Yugoslavian politics. But as you say, I'm risking putting myself into Idiot's Corner and admitting that I don't have much in-depth knowledge regarding his achievements, but I would submit Tito as a potential benevolent dictator, especially when you consider the Cold War context in which he ruled. I mean, for good or for ill, his achievements are probably best conveyed to the uninformed like me by the fact that he held Yugoslavia together in a way that rapidly became unholdable togetherable after his death. Thank you, Mohammed. Andre is in my land. Andre, what would you like to say?
Hi there. About the dictatorship thing, the generational question.
Yes.
So I'm 35 years old now. I was born in Romania just after the dictatorship regime finished.
Ceausescu.
Yeah, so Ceausescu got killed. And now Romania was a free country and we adopted the democratic system. So everybody was happy. Now they put a new government in place and we copied the exact situations in America. So now you have a lot of people, parties fighting and making a show of this, whatever you want to call it, the circus, and they're robbing the country blindly. And everything which was built by Ceausescu now is falling to the ground, and the people are suffering more than before.
It is. Is this a widespread view? I mean, you're nostalgic for an era that you didn't live in.
No, I'm just saying, I'm not nostalgic. I'm just saying I am comparing now the two regimes because I was born between them in the middle. So I don't know how it was before.
Well, I mean, the figure that I remember from when Ceausescu was executed, that he was responsible for the death of 60,000 Romanians.
Yes. However, the news as well, like some truth stories which they didn't go out the media. Most of the crimes. I'm not a big fan of him as well, obviously, but I'm just saying not always the whole truth comes out. It came out most of the corruption, which he had no clue was happening. His security teams, they were murdering people and stuff like that in his name.
Well, then he wasn't a very good dictator, was he?
He wasn't.
If he didn't know what was going on in his name, and all the bad stuff had nothing to do with him, but all the good stuff. I mean, he tried to flee the country with about $1 billion that he'd stolen from the Romanian people and deposited in foreign banks.
They say he was trying to pay the...
Well, we can't go all fake news on this, can we, Andre? We can't go alternative facts on it. So in terms of...
Let's go back to the point.
And the point is this. You might not have been alive at the time, but you have an idea that he was a more effective leader than the squabbling, possibly corrupt... I was
trying to say, when he was came about building stuff, they were more efficient. So when they wanted a few hospitals done, they were done. When they wanted motorways, they were done. That's what the thing is. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's your country. I'm not going to argue with you about the details of it, but I'm not sure healthcare was exemplary during Ceausescu's era, but all you have to point out to me is that it's no better now, and your point would stand. I think you might be onto something there with the sense of visible. I am in charge. If I press that button, this will happen. I am in charge. If I press this button, we'll spend 6 months arguing about it, have a public inquiry, and then at the end of that, absolutely nothing will change. That's the point he's making. I don't think it's hard to argue with that. You know, inquiries here, inquiries there. What do you want? Action. And now, where are we now in this country? Having arguments about whether or not we need another inquiry into crimes that were investigated by a national inquiry that came up with 20 recommendations that haven't even been bloody implemented yet. What would a dictator have done? I don't know. Absolute power. That's the problem. Power corrupts. Who said this originally? Someone will know. Text me. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you might start off being a benevolent dictator. And I'm not sure any of our examples are going to work. You might start off being a benevolent dictator, but it's hard to sustain. Thank you, Andre. 11:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm thinking about social care as well, oddly, inspired by Andre's conversation about Nicolae Ceausescu and the Romanian dictatorship. If you know, Wes Streeting's kicked the social care can down the road again. And part of the reason for that is, part of the reason I think is that it is, the alternative is to tell people things that they don't want to hear, which generally will involve being told that we're going to have to pay for our own social care moving forward into the future. And you can have another inquiry about it. You can have another debate about it. All parties can agree that the system is a disgrace. We all know it jams the National Health Service. Spoke about that yesterday. Heaps pressure on councils that are already close to bankrupt, causes misery for the infirm and the disabled. So we're having an independent commission on social care that will report in 2028. That's what I mean about the system. What would a benign dictator do? Well, I don't know. You might not like it, but they'd fix it. Or at least they'd try to fix it by saying, well, you're all going to have to pay for your own social care. Or we're going to have a dementia tax. Everybody in the country is going to have to start paying money into a pot that will be used to provide social care for the 20 to 50%, depending on your age, of people that will need it later in life. It's a huge political... What's the word? Minefield that is a disaster, political disaster. To deliver what the country needs will be politically impossible, probably, until someone comes along and says, look, I'm sorry, it's like Theresa May tried, didn't she, with the dementia tax? Am I remembering that correctly? That's what happens when you try and fix this. So Wes Streeting kicks it down the road. What would a benign dictator do? I don't know, but they wouldn't have an inquiry. You can be fairly sure of that. But why does age affect this? Why would being currently aged between 18 and 45 make you 2 or 3 times more likely to quite like the idea of a dictatorship over a democracy? Susan is in Crete. Susan, who have had their own flirtations with military juntas, of course. What would you like to say, Susan?
John Dahlberg Acton is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Well done, Efaristopouli.
What I wanted to say, and I will try and remain coherent because my thoughts are not quite, I haven't quite got them all in a row.
Welcome to the club, Susan. Welcome to the club.
Thank you. I think part of the difficulty is that young people really, they don't. A dictator obviates the necessity for any responsibility or engagement.
This is a less generous analysis of the motivations of the young, as opposed to their plight and their peculiar circumstances different from their older ones. This is a less generous explanation.
Well, if I go on,
yes, go on.
I'm not sure it is less generous.
I'll shut up then.
Because I feel that a big part of the problem is the breakdown in the social contract.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm a baby boomer. I'm an old lady now, and I was born and brought up in an era where there were safety nets. You know, if I was ill, I knew I would get health care.
Yes.
If I was unemployed, I knew I would get support, and so on. But now, in the last, 15, 16 years, I think the state side of that contract has broken down, hopefully not irretrievably, but it's beginning to feel irretrievable. For a young person, therefore, if they think about it, they don't know what's going to happen if they're ill. They don't know what's going to happen if they're old. The world is quite a dangerous place. In a way, it wasn't to me at all. And I think that leads to a complete unwillingness to engage. If the state is not fulfilling their side of the social contract, why the hell should they? Why should they?
This is a very similar conversation to the ones that we have about economically inactive people, and that's no coincidence, is it? When you sort of think, what is the point of me upholding my end of the social contract when the state's end of the social contract has been torn up by, I would say, 14 years of austerity with a side order of Brexit?
Yes, absolutely. So much has been removed from young people, from education to the ability to travel without problems, I repeat, healthcare. If they ever think about getting old, they must be absolutely terrified, really. I mean, my son is, 40 and 41, I think. And I mean...
Well, you were there.
Yeah. But he
a completely different horizon in front of us, a completely different set. And property ownership probably part of that as well, in terms of feeling a stake, and then social capital, the things that you don't necessarily own but you enjoy access to, which brings healthcare into the equation, and social housing, all of these things. I saw a story today that the Green Party were promoting about somebody in Bristol, a 21-year-old in Bristol who rents one room in a shared home, will have given by their 30th birthday £80,000 to their landlords. And you sort of find yourself thinking, wow, no wonder you don't feel that the system is working for you, or no wonder you don't feel minded to put your shoulder to the wheel, because all you're going to do is make your landlord richer. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. That's I hadn't thought of it from that end of the telescope, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And of course, I mean, the subtext of what you're saying is, please just take care of things for me and make things better. And I don't really care about how, and I don't want to be having more inquiries and arguments and parliamentary debates. Will someone please just bloody well get on with it? Well, yeah, absolutely. It's about feeling safe, I think, isn't it? And I don't think that people feel safe. And I don't think they should feel safe, because they're not. And that is categorically linked to the generation that you were born into, which you brought into the conversation at the very beginning. Yeah. How's Crete today, on a happier note? It's beautiful, actually. It's beautiful. I've got about 20 degrees out there, and happy day. It's not quite wall-to-wall sun, but it's warm lovely. Warm enough. I love Crete. Beautiful island. Thank you, Susan. I will spare you any more of my schoolboy pidgin Greek, because no one deserves that. 11:57 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mo's in Birmingham. Mo, what made you pick up the phone?
James,
Mo.
I'm a Democrat. I believe that democracy is the best political system out there, but I'm very disillusioned with the politicians that we have empowered as a people to enact that democracy.
How old are you?
I am 42.
Okay, so you're in the right zone.
Yeah. And this is the thing here, and this is why I'm not saying that I'm attracted by the dictators out there.
Sure.
But I think the dictators are better able to elaborate grandiose plans that attract the people, that people actually want, far better than the Democrats that we've got out there, who I think are stuck in a slurge of technocracy.
Yeah.
They are far too technical. Sometimes you need to be able to elaborate a vision with real clear clarity that people don't need to kind of like navigate a maze to get to. And I think
Mo, you make a point. I think Mohammed talked about Tony Blair as coming, and it's really interesting to see what Tony Blair said in his last book about Britain becoming a prisoner of process. What was the word you used there? Splurge? What was it?
Yeah, splurge.
Like a splurge, and this is what they mean when they talk about the blob, I suppose, in a way.
Yes.
And Blair said that process is a worthy means to an end. The trouble is its tendency to become the end. So you have a continuous loop of deliberation, not decision. And that is what you're describing. And that's what Tony Blair is describing. And arguably, Tony Blair was the last prime minister to come to power in this country with what you've just described, with a big programme for change, even if it was Rolex, even if it was just slogans and PR and Cool Britannia and New Labour, it landed.
Yes. And I think, again, just to elaborate on why dictatorship appears to be good, I think over the last 20 years we have seen, like it or not, with the help of social media, the coolification of certain dictators. Dictators that appear to be cool, that appear to speak the right language, language of the people, who don't get... I'll give you one example. The Nicaraguan dictator, Naguib, I think it is. He's one that you see quite often in the press. He's been very draconian in terms of his tackling of the drug gangs. He wears cool clothes. He speaks in very straight language. And the people love it.
Listen, I may be advertising my own ignorance here, but I don't know that many people in the 18 to 45-year-old age category in this country are following the lead of a Nicaraguan dictator. I know people like Farage are always talking up people like Vladimir Putin. That might be part.
Yeah, well, he's another one.
Yeah,
actually.
that might work.
He's probably the one who kicked it all off.
Yes.
We laughed at him fishing bare-chested, for example, or riding horses, or wrestling and to judo and so on. But then people also saw the videos of him bringing up, oligarchs and telling them off in very straight language about,
actually, you've knitted together two of my topics quite beautifully, because someone suggested we were being a bit hard on Mark Zuckerberg. I lost the message. Maybe he just doesn't want to be put in a cage on live television, which is, of course, what Putin did to one of the old oligarchs.
I think it was named, yeah.
Before they all started giving him half of their money in order to avoid the same grisly fate in a Moscow courtroom. But that's the other point, isn't it? You wouldn't want to be Russian.
Well, we wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be
bread. Oh, I'm really cross. It's so hard to buy a house. I want to live in a country where you queue for bread.
Yeah, but
or you get bloody press gang that have to go and get yourself killed in Ukraine.
Yeah, no, there is all of that. But then on the flip side, you see the idea that what happened before Putin, the chaos, the rule of the gangsters.
He is the rule of the gangsters. I hope you're better on Nicaraguan politics than you are on Russian politics. He's the ultimate gangster. His entire regime is a kleptocracy. But I don't know. You can see why it could possibly be perceived as attractive, although not for the first time. I find myself somewhat baffled by the mental gymnastics of Nigel Farage, who I think has described Vladimir Putin as the politician he admires most in the world, or something like that. Maybe part of what Mo is describing, if you keep telling people that this disgusting despot, how odd that he also likes Donald Trump, this disgusting despot is great. Why? Because he gets things done. What things? Well, I don't know, epic corruption, huge enrichment of his mates, impoverishment of his own people, meaningless wars that he will never be forced to sacrifice himself or his children in. What do you want? More of that? It's 12:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 6 minutes after 12. That's interesting. Keith picks up on a few of the points that have popped up in today's programme and says, I don't want to labour a point, but you could be talking about the history of the Weimar government. Freedom but no morality to back it up, a future but little hope in its success, a vacuum filled by a man who claimed to be of the moment, if only people believed enough. That's how history is made, good or bad. I'm not yet persuaded that we need to worry unduly about 18 to 45-year-olds being 2 or 3 times warmer towards the idea of dictatorship than other generations, because it doesn't necessarily... I say dictator, you think Nazi. But a lot of these people will be thinking, I just don't like the mode of government. I wish Keir Starmer could get things done. I wish maybe not Liz Truss. I wish David Cameron didn't have to. Do you see what I mean? It's the idea that democracy stops people from getting things done. For the absolute avoidance of doubt, and I don't think this is necessary, it's a terrible idea. It's utterly disastrous in every imaginable way. History has taught us that. That's why we're struggling to think of anyone who might possibly provide a sort of positive inspiration. I'm interested in why people are thinking what they're thinking, not whether they're right or wrong. I'm working on the proviso that they're obviously wrong. Nick in Helston says, my only example would be Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Quite a few people have mentioned Ataturk. I haven't got the history. He goes on, more importantly, I heard an interview with the director of the new film 2073. Is James really in it? To which the answer is yes, although no one's more surprised than me, actually. I did something with a brilliant director, Asif Kapadia, during lockdown, and I'd forgotten all about it, and it turns out it's in a big movie. It's exciting, isn't it? We'll all go and see it this afternoon. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Back to dictatorships and specifically why younger people are much more likely to feel warmly towards them, or even to prefer them theoretically, and I don't think we'll ever find out practically, at least not on this side of the Atlantic, to actual democracies. If you want to join this conversation, you know what to do. Richard puts it well, I'm all for dictatorships as long as I'm the dictator. It's not quite the end of the argument, is it? I'm all for dictatorships as long as the dictator does loads and loads of things I want them to do. And that's why it can be both good and evil, good or bad. Anything under the sun, really. Malcolm's in Northampton. Malcolm, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, first of all, pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
I've been listening to you for years, and I'm just really, really glad to speak to you.
Thank you, Malcolm.
I was just speaking to one of your researchers, and I think I fall firmly in the category of young people. I'm 35, and one of the things that I think is appealing is the ability to get something done without a debate.
Yes.
You just go straight away. If you need £40 billion for social care, bam, there, have it. Tomorrow it's in the account.
Well, I have to get it from somewhere, don't I? So
you do.
An 80-seat majority gives much more leeway than a tiny majority would do, but they still can't. There is no magic money tree, to coin a phrase.
You say that. I grew up under Zimbabwe, so I grew up under Mugabe, and he created money from nowhere. Obviously, there were massive inflation issues, but as an example of what he did, that a lot of people still to this day in Zimbabwe still appreciate is in 1995, he went out and said, okay, well, you can have farms, you just have to go and take it from so-and-so.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You have permission, go and do it. And farms were seized and what have you.
And again, you'll know more about this than I do, but didn't he start off very differently to how he ended up?
Massively, and that's exactly why I wanted to call. He started off being a very intelligent politician. He came into power in '82 very much on a I think it was a historical, it would have been an historical vote, and then the atrocities began afterwards. So growing up, I wasn't aware of the massacres that happened down in Matabele land in '86. I only became aware of that afterwards. But when he came into power, he had the agreement with Margaret Thatcher, I think it was, regarding the Lancaster House Agreement, which was land will be returned to the native people. That wasn't forthcoming, so he just went out and took it. And that's why there's a lot of respect, quote unquote, for him from people who benefited from that.
I see. Yeah, and yet Well, I suppose given the demographics of Zimbabwe at the time, he probably would have got a democratic mandate to do that as well, wouldn't he?
He would have. And again, because he was appealing to the people who did not have enough. So a lot of people out in the rural areas and sticks, they didn't have enough. So they were literally existing on the land that they had. And if they were told, okay, well, we can give you 4 more hectares, go out and take it from your neighbour.
Okay, now tell people why they shouldn't want a dictatorship.
Well, obviously, look where Zimbabwe is right now. So it used to be the breadbasket of Africa. It used to produce maize, cotton, sugarcane. It used to be one of the biggest producers of agriculture in the world for such a tiny place. And right now there's rampant inflation. I still have my $100 trillion note, which is no longer valid currency, but 20 years ago, I beg your pardon, 2010, it was worth half a week's worth of groceries. Incredible. And then the week later, it was worth 45p. It is absolutely astonishing how quickly that inflation just grew.
That's not an inevitable upshot of dictatorship? It's an upshot of this dictatorship.
Yeah, it's a combination of dictatorship and then corruption. So Mugabe was benefiting because he was in charge. All of his ministers were benefiting because they were able to say, okay, well, I can see that my land here is next to this commercial farm. I can tell these young guys, go and steal it, take it for me. I'll employ them to have that land, but I actually own that land. So it would be the combination.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to struggle, aren't we, to find any model that might offer support or succour to the younger generation. Now that you here, when did you move to this country, Malcolm?
I came here in 2010.
Well, that's perfect then. What do you think it is about this country at this point in our history that makes the notion of dictatorship 2 or 3 times more attractive to your generation than mine?
I think you summed it up from, I think Richard was the one that made the comment. As long as it's not happening to me, and as long as I am benefiting, then why not?
Then we're back to the Trumpian analysis, aren't we? As opposed to the benevolent dictator or the one who would actually work very hard to make the country a better place for most, or a better place for many.
Exactly. And an argument could be said for Zimbabwe, for the people that benefited by having the land given to them. They are in that position.
You can answer this question from Matthew. Do I change my outlook on dictatorships when I turn 46 next month?
I won't, but having the experience of growing up under a dictator, that would be my reasoning for it.
And I'm very grateful to you for it. It's a fascinating perspective, a Romanian and a Zimbabwean perspective on what it's actually like. Well, actually, Andre wasn't living under one, but has sort of subscribed to some slightly, I probably won't like me for saying this, possibly some slightly rose-tinted second-hand memories of what life was actually like under Nicolae Ceausescu. It is 12:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 17 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I love messages like this. I also love the idea of somebody who doesn't really listen to this sort of radio but thinks they know what it's all about, tuning in by accident one day and hearing me read out a message like this one from Ollie. I've just started listening, James. Sorry for being late. Surely Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus is the best dictator of all time. Back in 428 BC, I think, and another time too. You make a very good point, Ollie. You make a very, very good point. Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus probably does fit the category, but not in the way that we need, as I'm sure you know, because that other time too only lasted for about a fortnight. So Cincinnatus was, I don't think they had emperors back then. It's right in the really, really early days of the Roman Republic. And you're right, it's 400 and something BC. And he gave it up. He went off to be a farmer. Do you know this story, Keith? It's a lovely story. He went off to be a farmer. And then there was a terrible war. I'm giving you the slightly potted version of Roman history at this point. He'd gone off to be a farmer, retired from public life, leading a bucolic existence. But the Roman army was having a terrible time fighting a force. I never know how to pronounce this. It's spelled Aequi. The Aequi? The Aequi? Who knows? There's no one here to correct us, is there? not going to bump into someone who speaks fluent Latin in the way of a native Roman from 428 BC. So the Roman army was that. What's that? You've just tuned into a British phone-in radio station. Yeah, where are all the taxi drivers complaining about immigration? So the Roman army was having a terrible old time with the Aequi. So they sent a message to old Cincinnatus, who was ploughing his field at the time, and history has it, although of course we rely on Livy for this, and he's not the most reliable account. So he's having a plough, old Cincinnatus, probably with an oxen or two, or three. He was quite a rich man, a lot of oxen, ploughing his field. And the tribune turns up, or the messenger turns up, he says, "Oi, Cincinnatus, we need you back in Rome. We're having a terrible time with the Aequi. They're giving our boys all the right old hiding," he said in Latin. So Cincinnatus hung up his plough. He left his plough in the field. He went back to Rome. He took complete control of the entire state. He saw off those pesky Aequi in about a fortnight, I think, give or take a couple of days. About a fortnight flat. They were done and dusted. Absolutely vanquished. Rome back on top. Everything hunky-dory, or huncus dorius, as the Romans would have said. And he went back. That's the thing that makes his story so memorable historically. He went back to his plough. So he had absolute power, absolute uncontested control of the Roman Republic, but he went back to his farm and carried on ploughing. So I don't know if that works, Ollie, in the way that we thought it might work, because he didn't spend... Well, his first period was generally regarded as pretty impressive, a sort of model of civic virtue. But the second period is only sort of 2 weeks long, 15 or 16 days, I think. So anyway, there it is. There's the tale of Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Why do 18 to 45-year-olds find themselves more drawn to the idea of a dictatorship than, say, their parents? Grant is in Wadebridge. Grant, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, hi. Look, this is really relevant for me. I had a chat with my 24-year-old son on the weekend. He actually brought the conversation up. And just to put it into brief context, this is a young man who went to university, was very left-wing with his thinking, and I possibly take some credit for that. He would... Or
blame, Grant.
It could be, yeah. I'll take blame for plenty, James.
Yeah.
But, he'd read books on Noam Chomsky, he'd read books on, Owen Jones on Chavs, and very, very left-wing with his thinking when he went to university. But the conversation on the weekend, he sort of started off by saying, masculinity is really important, Dad. Whoa. And he said, the right seem to be the only ones talking about the importance of strength, honour and discipline. That's how we started the conversation off. And when we talked about it, and I said, well, give me some examples. Yeah. He gave me Elon Musk and he gave me Andrew Tate. And he said, look, I know Tate's not a good guy. He said, but almost like an apologist, he said, I know some of his stuff is really abhorrent, but some of it is really on the mark. And the point that I'm making there is a couple. One is, I know we talk about social media, but we can't No,
we mustn't stop talking about it. Just because it's becoming an obvious answer to the question doesn't mean it's not the correct answer.
Exactly right. And the second thing is that, these guys, that 18 to 45 age bracket is enough. There'll be enough disaffected people there. And, he talks about all his mates, right? They're all male, feeling exactly the same.
How do they feel about women?
I didn't go deeply into that. He's a really respectful young man, but
it can't be both. I know you know this.
No, exactly. Well, when I talked about Andrew Tate and said, look, he's got no honour for the way that he talks about women and the way that he claims to have treated women, and my son absolutely agrees with me. So I know there's a road that we've got to go down. There's a long conversation we've got to have for me just to nudge him back towards, something. But what he's being influenced by is a powerful force, James. And I my concern is that cohort are enough to swing upcoming elections.
Yeah, well, they could become that. And I mean, you're conflating dictatorship with extreme right-wing and misogynistic rhetoric, which is fair enough, because I think we all do that in the first instance. But I'm drawn also to the opposite analysis, which is that this is a consequence of dispossession and dissatisfaction, and people who want a better society for people like them, not just for men or just for that would want a more equitable society, and therefore a government that can do things more effectively without having endless debates and endless inquiries and the rest of it. So there are more than two answers to this question, but I suspect yours is the most relevant because of what they're exposed to. I read today Netflix has overtaken the BBC, and that's got nothing to do with the conversation that we're having, but it speaks of a generational shift that a lot of people on our side of the fence are not fully across. These podcasts, these Joe Rogan podcasts and people like that, Tech Bros and the rest of it, they are a huge part of the diet that your son's generation consumes, and yet you wouldn't even know that they existed if you were following exclusively the kind of media that we grew up with.
Exactly right. And just a question to leave you with, James, because I know you're a busy guy, and I, by the way, forgive me, I haven't listened to you in months.
What?
In fact, I haven't listened to anything since Trump got re-elected. I just unplugged. But my question would be, how do we begin to address that conversation and to actually, provide meaningful reality and balance back into the argument?
It's always questions. Stop asking him what he thinks or what Andrew Tate thinks, and just ask questions. What would that mean? What would that look like? Where would your sister fit into that? How would you speak to how would you explain that to your mother? Questions.
Nice one, thank you.
No, you're very welcome. It's a bit of a cop-out, but it generally works, and obviously I do it for a living, or I used to. Thank you, Grant. It's 25 minutes after 12. Speaking of questions, I am asking them on the night of the 10th of February. This is lovely. I'm really looking forward to this. Carol Vorderman and I will be spending an evening together on stage in Leicester Square here in London. It's entirely for charity. It is all for LBC's charity, Global's Make Some Noise. It's a special one-off live recording of my podcast, Full Disclosure, which Carol has been on before, but not with the pleasure of a live theatre audience, which means, of course, you can ask her questions as well as me. All proceeds will be going to Make Some Noise. I probably don't need to tell you much about Carol Vorderman. She is national treasure status, one of the most successful broadcasters of the last 20 or 30 years, or more, actually. But we'll talk about the very early days, talk about her political, what would the word be? Political explosion over the last few years, and where that has come from, and also what she's been up to since she had to took the very difficult decision of scaling down her commitments here at LBC. But I think need to tell you a little bit more about Make Some Noise, which is Global's charity, Global being the parent company of LBC, that every year helps an array of smaller charities across all manner of sectors, all of which are dedicated to looking after people in this country who most need a little bit of help. So we look at homelessness, we look at food poverty, we look at life-limiting illness, poor mental health, isolation, caring, the people who sometimes get forgotten, who dedicate their lives to looking after the people in their own families and circles who fit into the categories I've just listed. So you can help. You can support Global's Make Some Noise by simply sitting in the audience on February the 10th and having the time of your life. If you go to makesomenoise.com, either now or later today, go to makesomenoise.com. You'll find very easy to follow instructions on how you can buy your tickets for the special Full Disclosure recording with special guest Carol Vorderman on Monday the 10th of February. And I won't be on air that day, as things stand, for reasons that I will share with you shortly. But I will. So don't look at it and think, hang on a minute, James is on holiday that week. What's he going to be popping up in Leicester Square for? I will be in Leicester Square on the evening of the 10th, but I don't think I'll be on LBC on the morning of February 10th. But either way, tickets at makesomenoise.com to find out more and buy your tickets. These small projects really do need your support now more than ever, because for some of the reasons we've touched on in the last hour or so, it's to make sure that no one is left facing life's toughest challenges alone. And there'll be lots of meets and greets afterwards. There you go. Susan's got a keeper. My husband got me tickets for Christmas, she writes. And there'll be meets and greets afterwards where I'll be available to sign body parts, tattoos, foreheads, various limbs. I'm happy to sign limbs, or indeed books, board games, or just sort of big old posters. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This was on the line between a missing words round or an actual topic of conversation. I don't see the way into the topic of conversation at this stage, so I shall give it to you as a missing words round. Ultra-processed foods. You ready for this? Ultra-processed foods can give children blank and blanks. Ultra-processed foods can give children blank and blanks. I mean, the morning on which we wake up and think that enough has been done to stem the tide of ultra-processed foods is a morning that is not going to dawn anytime soon. But given my enormous gifts as a radio presenter, I'm going to use it as an example of something that a benevolent dictator could actually do tomorrow. So if you wanted to just ban ultra-processed foods, you'd have secretly funded lobby groups going spare, you'd have other political parties getting absolutely furious about it, you'd have all of the people who make a ton of money out of ultra-processed foods kicking up all sorts of fuss, the media would be giving you a hard time, the public might be giving you a hard time. Remember when Jamie Oliver tried to improve the diets of school children and their own mothers started pushing turkey Twizzlers through the chain link fence because they hated the idea of their children having to eat healthy food. So that's the kind of thing a dictator could do. This is the positive reading of why young people are quite drawn to the idea. Grant, I think, gave us a more negative reading in the context of his own family. But the positive reading would be, if I was in charge tomorrow, I would ban ultra-processed food. Genuinely, 2 silly questions for it. Shall I do them after the news? I've got 2 more questions for you, which I will share after the news headlines with Tim Humphrey.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You're much funnier than me. I know, you knew that already. Missing word round today. Ultra-processed foods can give children blank and blanks. Constipation and spots. My first band was called Constipation. No, it wasn't. Constipation and spots. Orange skin and far-right views, suggests Jonathan. There's loads of coming, but hemorrhoids and bad breath, says Roddy. That was my second band. Is it flatulence and stomach aches? There's a bit of a theme emerging here. Chacodemus and pliers. I love that. Yes, as I said, you're much funnier than me. Some of these are absolutely brilliant. The Trumps. I can't read that one out, as you well know, Ian. Stop trying to get me into trouble. The correct answer is as mad as the rest of the answers, to be honest with you. Very funny. Very funny. Ultra-processed foods can give its author a top-selling book and keep your efforts out of the #1 spot. Thank you very much, Andrew. And that has the annoying attribute of being factually correct. It was indeed the ultra-processed foods book that pipped me to the #1 Sunday Times best-selling spot earlier this year. Thanks for the reminder, mate. The correct answer is ultra-processed foods can give children buck teeth and smaller jaws. There's a really horrible stroke beautiful word here. I don't know if it's in the version of the story that I've got, about what they do to food to make it easier stroke more pleasant to eat. So children are now eating liquids and semi-solid foods, and as a consequence their jaws aren't developing properly because evolutionarily we were formed by the hunter-gatherer diet, rich in meat and foraged foods, lots of cereals and grains, so your molars worked quite hard when you were eating. Can you find the word? Do you know what the word is? There's a really, palatable or something. There's a slightly odd word to describe what they're doing to the foods. They talk about mouthfeel. That's a horrible phrase, mouthfeel. That made me go all funny. Stop it! Don't say mouthfeel. Stop it! That's horrible. But there's another word as well. But that is it. So if you're feeding your children lots of processed food, they're going to end up looking like Bugs Bunny and also have a tiny jaw. They look like a Habsburg. So there is a reason why. Another reason why. The current theory is that we're feeding our kids baby food for the whole of their lives so they don't develop the jaw muscles or the size of the jaw and aren't adapted for chewing. It's another sign of how Western countries have succumbed to this wave of soft, ultra-processed foods that is now the main diet of children, so many of whom are never having hard, proper foods. Huge rise in orthodontic problems in children. Massive use of braces and crooked teeth, and that's going to be the children that have got access to a dentist who are almost certainly going to be middle class. Anyway, it means that we're looking at an epidemic of jaw shrinkage that has been going on for a few hundred years, because we're obviously not hunter-gatherers anymore, but has really picked up pace in the last 2 decades. It leads me, no, the word is not velveting. That's what you do to chicken. It's in China when you're making Chinese food sometimes. It's not Hall & Oates. Well done, Jonathan. Keep them coming. No, and mastication is just another word for chewing, Bill. It's not that. There's a word that they use to describe the food that is... Anyway, I've got 2 questions for you on the question of dictatorships. And we've got to catch up with Henry Riley about the continuing tribulations of Tulip Sadiq, for whom I suspect the clock is now ticking after 12:45. I've suggested I would abolish... So talking about the reason why you're drawn to the idea of a dictatorship is because you would simply be able to get things done. But we're going to pretend that they would all be good things. What would you do first? Day one, if you were a dictator. You can text me on this, or WhatsApp me, or Blue Sky me. What would you do? I'm getting rid of ultra-processed foods, or I'm just reducing enormously the proliferation and availability of ultra-processed foods. What would you do first? That's the thing. It's got to be the first thing you would do. And the second question is a bit of a weird one. What would happen to China if it became a democracy tomorrow? So no one's mentioned China yet, although I think Tom is on the line, is about to, after Alexander. So rather than telling you who's on the line and what they're about to say, I'll just ask them. Alexander is in Wellingborough. Alexander, what would you like to say?
Hello there. Hi. So essentially, right. I'm 35 and would definitely consider myself. Sorry, that's a lie. I'm 39. Oh God.
Fake news.
I would the fake news, and I would consider myself centre left. Okay.
Yes.
So what brought it for me is that in the circumstance of the news of the world, I thought that basically nobody wanted to take on the media hacking dead children's phone and even the king's phone, among others, because nobody wanted to lose the next election. So even though everyone knew what was right, no government would dare do it. And I thought in that limited circumstance, I could see the benefit of being able to act on your, on your moral leanings.
That's the perfect example. Because you would use your dictatorial powers, or you'd want someone else to use their dictatorial and profoundly anti-democratic powers to actually enhance values that we would once have described as democratic, but we wouldn't be able to do anymore because we got rid of the democracy in order to deliver the dictatorial powers that you would use to shut down a corrupt media.
Yeah.
Because mostly... dictators would use their powers to shut down the non-corrupt media, the bits of it that actually speak truth to power, are the kryptonite to traditional dictators. But you're right, that showed us a relatively modern phenomenon where media owners arguably had more power than prime ministers.
I agree, and I think what it is for me, fundamentally, it comes down to trust of the public.
Yeah.
I unfortunately, we're in an era where after Brexit, after voting for Trump, it's gross, the whole Trump thing, I just don't trust humans. And that sounds really dark, but I just don't.
Well, that was almost the phone-in today. Not quite, why doesn't Alexander trust humans? That would have been weird. But yeah, we talked about, what was the phrase you used, Eleanor? What was the phrase that you used to say about what's gone? Yeah, meaning has gone. Well, all meaning has been removed from the world. The things that used to matter obviously don't matter. So what are you left with? And you've gone even further and said, I just don't trust humans anymore. Well, tune in every day, Alexander. I'll get you back on side.
I do.
What, and you still don't trust humans anymore? Come to the Carol Vorderman event. There you go. Come to the Carol Vorderman event on February the 10th, and there'll be lots of love in the room, and you'll start trusting humans all over again. He's right, though. I mean, what would you do first? Leveson 2. And stop the media from doing the corruption that needs to be done in order to get people to believe lots and lots of things that aren't true. Thank you, Alexander. 12:41 is the time. Steve says, this guy's right. I'm emotionally divorced from society. My inbox now is obviously tilting at least 3 windmills. And if you were to read these in isolation, you'd wonder what the hell I'd asked on the programme. I'd ban lorries and overtaking on A roads and motorways, writes Rob. I'd ban lorries from overtaking on A roads and motorways, writes Rob, proving once again why we never do motoring topics on this programme. Dan is being a bit of a troll. He says he'd outlaw Caramacs. And Rory reminds me, I think the phrase I was looking for was ultra-palatable foods, which isn't quite as unpleasant as mouthfeel sounds. Mouthfeel just sounds wrong. Anyway, I've bigged him up. Tom's in Melbourne, in Australia. Tom, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. Lovely to speak to you again.
Likewise.
Thank you. I think for me, if I was a dictator, the first thing I would do is tackle climate change, because I think everything that we are experiencing, it boils down to climate change, and everything that we're going to experience in terms of lack of trust in politics and everything else that's going on, it all leads back to climate change. So if I was a dictator, that's the first thing that
You'd have to be the world dictator. I know you could make an impact in an individual country, depending on which country you were the dictator of, but you wouldn't be able to fix it unless you were in charge of the whole world.
No, absolutely. But you just like Britain did so well in the industrial age, you could be a leader in it.
Could lead the field. That's not what you rang in to say, because I only asked that question after you were already on hold.
Absolutely, because that leads to my next point around China. So the chancellor went to China to look to drum up business, and it was mainly around energy and net zero. Right?
Yes.
And we're talking about China, where there's been a one-system party, where they've been able to bring policy around energy, electric cars, and solar for almost 2 decades now, because they've had that stability of the one-party system, whether it looks like a dictatorship or not.
Well, it is a dictatorship. I was going to say, you can't use one-party system as a euphemism for. And also you wouldn't want to be a Uyghur in China, or indeed the kind of person that turned up in Tiananmen Square to protest against modes of government. So I know you're aware of the negatives, but I just want to make sure everybody else is as well.
Absolutely, James. I wasn't sure whether it was definitely a dictatorship. That's why I didn't want to land there. But thanks for letting me know. I appreciate that.
Well, hang on. Now I'm embarrassed, because I don't know whether technically it would qualify as a dictatorship, because the leader, I think, is selected by a sort of Politburo of a panel of course. Probably another word for that, which would be I don't know what. But anyway, we digress. They are untroubled by elections, Tom. I think we can all agree about that.
That's right. That's right. And I think that untroubling by elections allows them to create policies that they can think 10, 20 years down the line, and they can be ahead of the game.
400-500 years.
That's right.
Look at what's going on in Africa.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And you look at our democratic system, yes, it gives us freedom of expression, but right now, like, look at housing as a policy and how much chopping and changing there is every single time a government comes in. You look at high school.
So you're citing China as, this is the crucial point in this quote, isn't it, is the word effective. That young people think that a dictator would be the best system for running a country effectively. And that's a broad church, effectively. But you're using China in good faith to say that's effective. And that's
right.
A de facto.
That's right. And also to link it back to young people, James, right? To link it back to young people is why young people, because young people just want housing, they just want infrastructure, trains running on time, public transport, right? And they want those things to happen. And right now, this system is not
and down with human rights and all that kind of thing. And I'm being a bit facetious when I say that, Tom, but you make a point obliquely that a lot of people will be very uncomfortable with. So in the very first hour of this programme, we're asking how people can possibly turn a blind eye to Donald Trump's vile and obvious abuses of democratic norms and democratic values. And people who quite like Donald Trump, whether they're prepared to admit it or not, are keen to claim that it's because people are struggling, people are poor. Why you don't understand in your leafy suburb of Brentford why people are struggling to get the yes you did we do. But when we talk about China and use exactly the same arguments, what are you going to say? You're going to go, no, he's absolutely right. What people like James don't understand is that you need to have absolute dictatorial regimes like the one in China, because people are just more worried about the price of petrol and the price of noodles than they are about democratic values and democratic. China bad, Trump good, and yet guilty in the context of the conversations we've had today of exactly the same things.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. You are like, I'm reading a message while trying to talk to you. Mike says it's like Livy has come again. I'm waiting for Henry Riley to arrive with the latest news on the Tulip Sadiq situation. Shall we summon him? Do we summon the Riley? I don't think we can do that, can we? That would be... 12:49 is the time. Speaking of China... This story you may have missed over the Christmas period. It was published on the 27th of December. The Chinese people are so miserable. It's a tiny little report from their China correspondent at the Beeb. Read a social media post in the wake of yet another mass killing in the country earlier this year. The same user also warned there will only be more and more copycat attacks. From 2019 to 2023, police have recorded 3 to 5 cases a year where perpetrators have just attacked complete strangers and pedestrians to take revenge on society. And in 2024, that figure jumped to 19. And it's a very, very good piece by Stephen MacDonald that I suppose we file under be careful what you wish for. So some of the conversations we've been having about the possible attractions of dictatorships for the younger generation might benefit from reading about probably the best available example on earth of what one actually looks like. And John takes things a little further when he goes, go and stand on top of a tube train in China, James, brackets just stop oil, and see what happens. Well, I mean, you'd get arrested, but you would hear as well, wouldn't you? I imagine that there might be a little bit more robust after-show activity after the arrest, but we arrested people were they in St. Paul's Cathedral, the people who graffitied on Darwin's grave? Henry will know. Henry, were they in St. Paul's Cathedral?
Was it Westminster Abbey,
Westminster Abbey, was it? Anyway, they graffitied on Darwin's grave, got themselves arrested. 12:51 is the time. I told you this story wasn't going to go away, and you, or rather, you told me, and one of us told the other one that this story wasn't going to go away, and the other one agreed. It's not gone away, although my sense that it was a slightly bigger deal than you allowed seems to be borne out by events.
Yes. You couldn't say I told you so.
I didn't say I told you so. That would be unprofessional.
Yes. I got some wet paint on me on the way down, by the way, James, which is why I was late. Apologies.
That's all right. Whereabouts?
It was just round the corner there.
Is the Queen coming? Is the King coming? Is the King coming for a visit?
Not quite sure what it was. So the reason for this, James, is you're quite right. I did say last week I sort of thought this would all go away. That has definitely not happened. And Alistair Campbell used to have that sort of famous quote, didn't he, of continuous days of coverage. I think it was 4 days before this becomes a major problem. Well, this has gone on for longer than 4 days and was on the front pages of some of the Sunday papers this week. And we've even got to the stage where people are shouting, journalists effectively camped outside of Tulip Sadiq's house.
Will you resign?
Tulip Sadiq, will you resign today?
Good morning.
What were your campaign leaflets going in your aunt's palace?
How can you do that, anti-corruption minister?
Are you history's unluckiest anti-corruption minister? What did Keir Starmer say to you today?
What was that last? Are you the UK's unluckiest anti-corruption minister? Who's that? Do you recognise
I don't actually know who it is. No, I tried to watch it back. I'm not quite sure, but it's a great question. Just to remind your listeners, James, because it's quite complicated, this. She's the Economic Secretary to the Treasury. She has anti-corruption and financial fraud as part of her brief. She's been accused of benefiting from her aunt and her aunt's political party, which is called the Awami League, used to be in power in Bangladesh from 2009 until last year when her aunt was deposed. The new regime say that her aunt was complicit in embezzlement and also crimes against humanity, including killing protesters, mainly students, during the uprising which took place last year. Now, Tulip Sadiq, nothing to do with that, but she does say that she never spoke with her aunt about politics in the past. That's been called into question because obviously Tulip Sadiq's posters and leaflets have been found in the palace of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh this weekend.
One of my favourite colleagues, who shall remain nameless, expressed a modicum of scepticism about that. So, I mean, a journalist turns up in the former palace of a deposed Bangladeshi leader and finds Tulip Sadiq's election material, conveniently finds Tulip Sadiq's election material. Just, what was it, on a sideboard?
It was her 2022 annual report to constituents of Hampstead that found in some rubble on the floor.
They speak of little else in Bangladeshi government circles. I mean, she's in all sorts of bother, but I did find myself chuckling at my colleague's scepticism on that particular front.
Well, he also found, this particular journalist from the Sunday Times, also found the list
one of the
of
best in the business.
who's
for
very
the record.
good.
He's absolutely
Gabriel
brilliant. Yeah.
Also found a list of gifts given to Sheikh Hasina, because actually still in the palace, you've still got some sort of amazing cushions, for instance, worth like £2,000, £3,000, and some of the.
It's like Boris Johnson's Downing Street.
But some of the gifts, I mean, Gazprom were on the list of giving
See the
Sheikh
lead singer of
Hasina some
Supergrass?
lifts. No. And Emmanuel Macron giving a big, and Alok Sharma actually gave a gift on behalf of the UK, which was a teapot.
See, that makes me proud.
Does
So all
it?
these other people are giving amazingly expensive and I mean, it was probably quite a nice teapot. I doubt they got it from
China.
IKEA,
China tea.
A China teapot. But we don't give bribes or anything that could be construed as a bribe. We give symbols.
Yes, exactly. And I think Emmanuel Macron gave a Chanel bag or something.
It's more expensive than a teapot.
I think a teapot's
more
better.
ingratiating than a teapot.
In terms of Tulip Sadiq, James, the allegations are still very much the same in that 3 houses she's said to have benefited from. All 3 people have connections with the Awami League, which is her aunt's political party. One is a spokesperson in London for the party, one is a lawyer who's represented the Awami League, and another is a businessman who's close to the Awami League. The reason this is so troubling is Bangladesh's corruption. If you look at Transparency International's corruption index, it ranks below Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Nigeria and Liberia. So it is seen as being one of the worst countries in the world, according to Transparency International, in terms of corruption. And what you've got now, James, is organisations that have no axe to grind with Tulip Sadiq coming out and saying she needs to stand aside. So today you've got the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition. That's made out of groups such as Oxfam. You've also got Protect, the whistleblowing charity, Transparency International. They've all come out now and said that she needs to stand aside. So it is looking...
for good, or just until the investigation is complete?
Yes, sorry, until the investigation's complete by Sir Laurie Magnus, and then she can obviously take that part of her role. So they're saying actually she doesn't even need to relinquish the role full stop, just that particular part to do with corruption. But I do think, and I get the sense, James, certainly from what ministers are saying to me, or MPs, that this has been able to drag on, allowed to drag on for so long, column inches every day being dedicated to it, huge swathes of broadcast coverage. Louise Haigh, some, again, who are sympathetic to her, feel that she had nothing like this. And Keir Starmer said in opposition, 1 strike and you're out. That happened with her. It hasn't happened with Tulip Sadiq. And I think the point, James, that I've picked up as well is the sort of only similarity between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson is they seem to not have many friends in Westminster, right?
Okay.
They're not really from those worlds. And Keir Starmer has colleagues that he's very close to, but he's not necessarily got many friends in Westminster.
Okay.
I think that's deliberate. But Tulip Sadiq is one of those friends. They go way back. They were both elected in 2015. Constituency neighbours. Hampstead is where Tulip Sadiq represents. And they've done fundraisers together. So there is definitely a sense of loyalty there from Keir Starmer, is what I've picked up.
Yes. And that possibly prolongs the agony in a way rather than alleviates it. Speaking of Boris Johnson, we should, I suppose, derive some comfort from the fact that we have an independent advisor on matters ethical now, because he dispensed, I think, 2 resigned in disgust at Boris Johnson's conduct, and for a long time neither he nor Liz Truss bothered replacing them.
Yes, and it was, as you say, it was Rishi Sunak who appointed the current advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus, and also important to point out, the anti-corruption czar, which is now Baroness Margaret Hodge, that was actually vacant since John Penrose quit in 2022 when everyone quit Boris Johnson's cabinet. So those 2 positions now finally filled.
And the results of this, any idea when Laurie Magnus might report?
No, they can. I've been told it can be as short as weeks and as long as months. So it's sort of how long is a piece of string. But I think Labour very much hoping that it probably goes on for a long time and that this dies down. But, of course, the problem is they don't want any further information to come to light.
Watch this space. Thank you, Henry. So if I ask you now whether or not you think this story is going to go away, what would your answer be?
Huge story. Said it from day one.
Nowhere. It's not going nowhere.
Going to be a problem.
If you missed any of today's show, or indeed any previous shows, you can listen back on, catch up on Global Player. Check the record with regard to Henry Riley's claims just a moment ago.
Can I say Tulip Sadiq denies any wrongdoing categorically?
Well done. Where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including, pay attention, the brand new James O'Brien Daily, which is an attempt, and granted it's only 60 minutes long, so it's almost an impossible feat, to get the best bits of my show into one convenient package. The James O'Brien Daily Podcast, some, maybe even occasionally most of the best bits of my show in a 60-minute package every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
That's the best bit.
Yeah, this is
that
going
last
in.
bit there.
That might make, you never know, that might make the cut.
I think it should. Mind you, what we mustn't do in order for it to make the cut is become self-consciously, fana.
Or go over 1 p.m. because, on this podcast that might work, but on the normal podcast, if I crash into your time,
they'd have your guts for garters.
It ends. They cut it off according to the clock anyway. They don't. Apparently, I don't know why, but anyway, you live and learn. On the whole show podcast, it ends at 1 p.m. whether I'm still talking or not. No, it doesn't. I should listen to it one day.
I don't think this one's going to make the cut.
Anyway, the best bits of my show every day. James O'Brien Daily.
Oh, Lord.
James O'Brien on LBC.